A mage, on the verge of death with a blade pierced through his chest, asked for one final response. He wanted to know if there were any survivors left there. He said that if anyone was still alive and unable to speak, they just needed to make any movement or sound. But even after checking everything around him, he realized he was the only survivor in that place. They had faced the one who unified the demons for the first time and brought humanity to collapse, the High Priest. And the one who led the war against the demons to save the innocent was the head mage of the White Tower. Everyone there had risked their own lives for the future of humanity. If it were not for them, no one else would have done it. The demon truly had been killed. At that moment, a dragon woman approached and announced that on April 28th at 3:12 in the afternoon, the death of the High Priest had been officially confirmed. That was Edna Sol Laplace, the last dragon in the world, and also the observer responsible for recording history. She said she had both good and bad news, so the White Tower mage asked her to start with the bad news. Edna Sol Laplace explained that, just as expected, the demon army had invaded the White Tower. During the attack, most of the mages died and a large part of the tower was destroyed. Nearly all the mages and research resources ended up being burned to ashes. After that, she shared the good news. The Empire's forces had arrived earlier than expected, so they managed to save some people, including his disciples. The mage replied that this alone was already a relief. Then Edna Sol Laplace asked if he regretted the choice he had made. He answered that he did not. He said that every member there had been personally chosen by him, so he had no right to claim regret now. After coughing up blood one last time, he asked her to look after his disciples from time to time. He said they were still young and would probably be restless after everything that had happened. She replied that she would do so whenever she had the time. The mage then asked if she had just bowed to him, even though she was a dragon. Edna Sol Laplace answered that he deserved it. She said that neither she nor the entire continent would ever forget the heroic sacrifices made by the White Tower. He replied that hearing that felt good. Even so, he admitted he would be lying if he said he had no regrets. He said that maybe he had been a great mage, but he had never managed to become a good leader, and if he ever had another chance, even if he had to be called a villain, he would live selfishly only for the sake of his people. That was the kind of life he wanted to live. Then Edna Sol Laplace closed her eyes and officially recorded that, on April 28th at 1:47 p.m., the death of the Master of the White Tower had been confirmed. His name was Oscar Sage. The final report stated that the High Priest had been defeated, but many mages had lost their lives in that battle. A long time later, inside a gigantic and extremely luxurious castle, a leaf fell onto a sleeping boy, startling him awake and making him spill the water a servant had just brought him. The man complained that his sleeping habits were terrible and that he did not even show gratitude for being taken care of. But the boy barely paid attention to that. He was far too confused, trying to understand how he had fallen asleep in such a vulnerable state. After all, he was certain he should have been dead. Then he placed a hand on his chest and realized his heart was still there, beating normally. He clearly remembered having his heart pierced and started wondering what the hell was going on. Before he could think further, someone completely destroyed the bedroom door while entering. The large man asked if he had finally woken up. Meanwhile, the younger man beside him tried to calm him down, saying he should be patient since it had not even been 5 minutes since the boy had opened his eyes. But the big man ignored him. He told Frank to get out of the way because he had let this slide too many times already, and now he would make that bastard pay for what he had done. Even so, the boy could only keep asking how he was still alive. The man replied that he also found it impressive that he was still alive after everything. The boy then noticed from the robe that the man was a mage from the White Tower. Because of that, he asked them to explain the situation in detail, but the large man lost his patience and asked how he still had the nerve to demand explanations. He said the boy should be reflecting and begging for forgiveness at that moment. The boy began to suspect he was being attacked. He even thought that man might be an assassin infiltrated by the demons. At that exact moment, he used a windshield. The idea was simple: cast the spell at the precise moment of impact to break the attacker's arm from the collision. In his eyes, that guy was a complete idiot who attacked without thinking. But the result was disappointing. The windshield only blocked the slap before disappearing immediately afterward. The spell was extremely weak. Even so, the man admitted that the windshield had been very impressive. He said that, at the very least, he had not become completely useless during that time, so he decided to postpone the punishment for embezzling research funds, and told him to focus on recovery instead. The man who had been taking care of the boy could not understand anything, and asked what kind of strange magic that had been. Meanwhile, the boy became even more frightened after realizing the windshield disappeared the instant it was used. He began analyzing his own body, and noticed something absurd. His mana circuits were terrible. The amount of mana was small, the purity was awful, and everything felt wrong. He started wondering how long he had been unconscious. The other mage commented that Maxim Bisk had always had a difficult personality, and that he had clearly crossed the line this time. But the boy barely heard him. He was still in shock over the condition of his own body. Then he asked what day it was. The man replied that it it was September 21st. Immediately the boy panicked and asked if he had been asleep for 5 months. The other man answered that he had not. In fact, he had not even been unconscious for a full day. Confused, the boy asked them to call Lloyd, Gilly, or Shasha. He said he wanted to hear the current situation directly from them, but the mage told him to forget about those traitors. He also asked why he was speaking so casually about the master and suggested that it must be a side effect of fainting. Then he explained that Lloyd had abandoned the White Tower and become a disciple of the Red Tower. Gilly had stolen a magic book and run away. Hearing that, Oscar Crushen became furious and asked how someone could say such nonsense so naturally. But then he realized there was no sign of lying in their expressions. After that, he asked if Shasha was now the Tower Master. The younger boy replied that, if he ignored the other 20 years of history, then technically that would make sense. At that moment, Oscar Crushen tried to calm himself down. After all, there was no point in getting angry at a boy who clearly seemed to have an overly active imagination. But when he looked out the window and saw his own reflection, he finally realized the truth. That was not Oscar Crushen's face. Later on, he could barely believe what had happened. He was living in a world 20 years after his own death, and many things had changed. The cities were developed, there were streetlights, and even cars moving through the streets. All of that was the result of the magical engineering revolution. He thought that the people of the old White Tower would have loved to see such progress. Back when the world had been collapsing, the only things that existed were despair and hopelessness. After calming down a little, he started organizing the memories of the owner of that body. At present, that body belonged to Oscar Crushen. He had entered the magic tower at the age of 10 and was now 20 years old. He was a level 1 mage from a fallen noble family. The problem was that he had terrible talent for magic. He had only managed to reach level 1 at 20 years of age. Probably pressured by that, he ended up embezzling research funds to buy an illegal elixir, and after drinking it, he basically died. It made sense. If the elixir worked, it would drastically increase the user's mana capacity, but if it failed, it would put the person's life at risk. That was why the substance was forbidden. Frank explained that he had remained unconscious for an entire day after taking the substance. The problem was that Oscar Crushen should already have been dead by then. His body was far too weak to withstand a mana explosion of that level. However, while analyzing the situation more carefully, Oscar Sage noticed something strange. The amount of mana in that body was absurd for a level 1 mage, and most of that mana was still pure, completely unrefined. Maybe that cheap illegal elixir had actually worked. But then he noticed something else. Several impurities were being expelled from the body. That was poison. At that moment, Oscar Sage began connecting the dots. He had a guess about what had really happened. First, the illegal elixir was not fake. On the contrary, it was legitimate. A type of item so extremely rare that it was difficult to obtain even by paying a fortune. The real problem was that Oscar Crushen had no idea he was being poisoned. After analyzing the amount of toxin still left in the body and the amount of time he had remained unconscious, Oscar Sage finally became certain of the truth. Oscar Crushen did not die because of a mana explosion. He was murdered through poisoning, and it was a poison far too powerful to be used against a mere level 1 mage. If anyone else had been in that body, they probably would never have noticed the traces of the toxin. He still did not know who had done it, but now he had been given a second chance at life. This time, he would live selfishly for the sake of his people. So he decided he would repay the favor he had received from that body. Oscar Sage would avenge Oscar Crushen in exchange for the chance to continue living. Later, on the outskirts of Searing, the leader of a criminal organization received troubling news. Apparently, one of their shops had been completely destroyed by a mage. According to the subordinates, the intruder had been asking who sold the elixir to him. That led to suspicion that it might have been Oscar Crushen, but the boss rejected the idea immediately. He said Oscar Crushen was only a theoretical mage, and on top of that, had practically been dying because of the elixir. There was no way he could destroy an entire shop alone. Even so, one subordinate asked whether the White Tower might have started an investigation. The boss replied that it made no sense, because the person who ordered the hit on Oscar Crushen had been wearing a White Tower ring. But at that very moment, someone invaded the place. A voice asked if they really believed someone would be stupid enough to use something so revealing. It was Oscar Crushen himself. In reality, Oscar Sage had managed to track down the location thanks to the faint scent that remained on the elixir bottle, and now he realized that more people were involved in this story than he had imagined. The boss asked if he was the one who destroyed the shop. He replied that he was. He also said he had become very interested in the subject they had been discussing. Without wasting time, the boss ordered his men to kill him. One of the guards immediately rushed forward with a sword, but a simple wind slash was enough to rip his head off instantly. Even Oscar Sage himself found it strangely easy. Then the boss stood up and fired, using a firearm, something Oscar Sage had never seen before. He became intrigued. Even so, the windshield blocked all the bullets effortlessly. While analyzing the weapon, he commented that he had not detected any mana inside it, and asked what principle was being used to generate so much power. He said he would analyze it properly later, because it was genuinely interesting. For now, he simply returned the bullets to the sender. The shots pierced through the criminal boss's body, though without hitting any vital points. Then Oscar Sage warned him not to expect reinforcements reinforcements, because every sound in that room had been completely blocked off. Frightened, the criminal asked how a mere level 1 mage was using a level 5 magic silence spell, but Oscar Sage replied that it was not even magic silence. He had simply imprisoned the sound inside the room using a sound prison. After that, he said he expected to receive some answers. Then he asked who had ordered the attack against him. When the boss refused to answer, he took a direct kick to the face. Oscar Sage commented that it seemed his pride was worth more to him than his own life. Right after that, he channeled wind into the criminal's body, causing unbearable pain. He made it clear that he did not enjoy torturing people very much, so it would be better for the man to start talking immediately. He ordered him to reveal everything about this so-called patron. After being partially released from the spell, the criminal finally gave in. He said that the man had delivered the elixir and also paid a large amount of money so they would sell the product at an extremely low price. According to him, there had been no option to refuse. The problem was that nobody had managed to see the man's face because he wore a hood. Even so, there was one thing he was certain about. The man wore a ring from the White Tower. Then the criminal remembered another important detail. He said that, if it could help, the man had an extremely distinctive scent, the smell of mint. Hearing that, Oscar Sage thought the information was more useful than it seemed. After that, he asked how the criminals planned to deal with his own death. The boss replied that the White Tower was far too busy dealing with the withdrawal of the 4 great magic towers to conduct any serious investigation. That confused Oscar Sage, who asked what he was talking about. Withdrawal of the 4 towers? The criminal found the question strange and replied that he should know that better than anyone. So Oscar Sage made up a story about having amnesia and ordered the man to explain everything. Covered in blood, the criminal grabbed a few documents and handed them to him. As he began reading, Oscar Sage discovered that White Knight Day had officially been established on April 28th, the date of the High Priest's death. The Emperor used the holiday to honor Oscar Sage's sacrifice, granting several benefits to the White Tower, including a 30-year tax exemption. But there was another important detail in the documents. Among all the magic towers, the White Tower had shown the worst results in recent years. The tower that had lost everything 20 years ago had never truly managed to recover. The documents also mentioned a major announcement from the imperial family that would take place during that year's White Night Festival. According to the experts, the White Tower's greatest problem was the complete absence of advanced magic. Oscar Sage was confused. What did they mean the White Tower had made no magical advancements? He clearly remembered handing all the documents to Edna Sol Laplace precisely to prevent something like that from happening. But the worst came afterward. They said the White Tower had also produced the worst commercial results among all the magic towers. At that moment, he wanted to understand what that actually meant. Then they explained how each tower had evolved over the years. The Eastern Yellow Tower, which controlled lightning, had opened the great era of magical engineering and created revolutionary inventions such as streetlights and magic-powered cars. The Southern Blue Tower, specialized in water magic, had dominated the businesses of drinking water, agriculture, and potions. Meanwhile, the Western Red Tower, originating from the desert, had joined forces with the military to participate in missions and subjugate monsters, and the White Tower delivered packages. Oscar Sage was incredulous. Deliveries? Delivering items? The criminal confirmed that yes, it was basically a postal service, only more efficient because the Wind Knights could fly. That was a brutal reality check for him. The mages of the White Tower once soared through the skies and were seen as symbols of freedom and bravery. They were compared to dragons and eagles, and now they had become delivery workers. Outraged, he asked who the damned fool was responsible for dragging the White Tower into such a ridiculous business. The criminal replied that, as far as he knew, it was the current tower master. After that, Oscar Sage asked about potions. After all, they had always been the greatest source of profit for any magic tower. The Blue Tower had only managed to monopolize that market because the White Tower had disappeared from it. 20 years ago, the White Tower had been the greatest authority on potions, but all the creation methods had ended up burned away. The criminal explained that the drinking water and agriculture sectors were making absurd amounts of profit, selling clean water at high prices and bringing rain to regions suffering from drought. Oscar Sage could not believe what he was hearing. In his mind, nobody should have to pay for water. People could simply drink water from a well. To him, it was just another ridiculous obsession of the rich. Even so, he quickly realized the truth. The White Tower simply could not compete with the other towers. Their businesses operated on an entirely different level, and the White Night Festival was practically the tower's last chance to prove its worth to the world. The problem was that only 7 months remained. At that point, the criminal was practically dying. Oscar Sage even considered saving him. After all, the man had provided important information, but then he saw the man's criminal record: arson, assault, illegal loans, extortion, and even solicitation of murder. After reading all of that, he simply left the man to die alone, saying he was basically a walking piece of trash. At the very least, maybe he could become a better person in his next life. Late at night, Oscar Sage returned to the White Tower completely exhausted. Even using only basic spells, that weak body drained him far too much. Even so, he decided to attempt the magic that had turned him into the greatest mage in human history, the Chronicle of Wind. He tried tried to activate the spell, but it immediately dispersed. He still could not use it. Before anything else, he needed to perfectly understand the current condition of his body. So he began a detailed analysis of himself, while recalling the information Frank had told him about Oscar Crushen. To save that body, it was essential to understand who Oscar Crushen truly was. He was the heir of Count Crushen, and the sole survivor of a disastrous mansion fire. Since childhood, the magical world had recognized his genius. Expectations surrounding him were enormous, and many people had tried to recruit him. During the 6 years he studied at the Imperial Faculty of Magic, he earned nothing but perfect grades, and when he published his extraordinary thesis, he proved to everyone that he was a true genius. The problem was his mana deficiency syndrome. Oscar Sage thought that, if that were true, it would explain why Oscar Crushen was still only level 1. He understood magic better than anyone else, but simply could not use it. However, when the analysis was complete, the result was even more shocking than a disease. Someone had deliberately sealed his mana circuit. Mana deficiency syndrome was a condition in which the body could not properly circulate or store mana. A mage could create up to 20 physical circuits in addition to the main mana circuit, and the number of those circuits defined their level. But when someone suffered from that syndrome, the entire system became unstable. Even training for an entire lifetime, that type of mage could never surpass level 3. But Oscar Crushen's case was different. His circuits were not defective or tangled. They had been intentionally tied down. Someone had done that on purpose. And if Oscar Crushen truly was a genius, then he probably knew it from the very beginning. Ideally, he should find a diary or something similar. But according to Frank, Oscar Crushen was an alcoholic. Even so, Oscar Sage began to suspect that it might all have been an act. Maybe he knew someone had blocked his circuit and was trying to kill him, so he decided to behave like a reckless playboy in order to throw everyone off. If that were the case, Oscar Sage could understand him perfectly. In a situation where he could trust no one, Oscar Crushen needed to break those chains by himself. And now, in his place, Oscar Sage only needed to untie the final knot that remained. While gathering a few books to help him, he found a volume filled with notes, stickers, and observations. It was a book about reinterpreting basic magic. Inside it, Oscar Crushen theorized about the windshield in a completely different way than normal. Instead of using the spell purely for defense, he imagined advanced ways of applying it in combat, while also leaving notes on how to improve the technique depending on the situation. Oscar Sage was impressed. Oscar Crushen could not properly use magic, yet he still carried out countless extraordinary experiments. At that moment, Oscar Sage realized just how similar the two of them were. Just by looking at that book, anyone could clearly understand that the boy had never given up on magic. On the contrary, he had worked harder than anyone else. At the end of the book, there was even one final message. He said he hoped that book would blow even the weakest wind toward the White Tower, and he signed it as a mage about to face the greatest challenge of his life. That was the moment Oscar Sage realized the entire truth. The original boy had known everything. He knew the elixir might be poisoned. Even so, he continued moving forward without giving up, despite the cruel fate he had been given. So, in the name of Oscar Sage, 17th Master of the Magic Tower, he swore that he would untie the knot Oscar Crushen had failed to break, and more than that, he would make everyone who had broken his wings pay for what they had done. Shortly afterward, he found himself walking through a greenhouse. At some point, he had fallen asleep from exhaustion while studying ways to undo that enormous sealed circuit. Then he realized he was standing before his former body, or rather Oscar Sage himself from the past, surrounded by his disciples. That was the curse of dreams. The Viscount of Nightmares from the demon world cursed Oscar Sage many years ago. Because of that, every time he slept, he was forced to relive memories from the past. The curse was directly tied to his soul, so even after changing bodies, it continued to work. At least this time he was lucky. The dream was a reunion with his disciples. In the memory, Oscar Sage was teaching a lesson about the 4 categories of magic: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and specialization. While explaining the subject, Lloyd asked if the White Tower belonged to the balance type. Oscar Sage answered that it did, since wind magic matched that category quite well. Then Shasha asked if every tower had a different preference, and Oscar Sage explained that they did, because each type of magic had its own characteristics. The Golden Tower believed speed was the most important thing, so it focused on acceleration magic. The Red Tower preferred fire, representing enhancement magic. Meanwhile, the Blue and White Towers followed the balance type. Gilly said he wanted acceleration magic because slow things irritated him. However, Oscar Sage explained that unfortunately nobody could choose. Every person was born with their own magic type. To discover what type someone had, the process was simple, so he created a basic magic circle and asked Shasha to concentrate his mana. The result showed that he belonged to the balance type. Then it was Gilly's turn, and just as he wished, he truly possessed the acceleration type. Finally came Lloyd, who ended up revealing himself as a special type. The boy asked if there really was no way to change it, but Oscar Sage answered that there was no reason to switch. Special types were extremely rare. Only 0.2% of mages possessed that kind of mana. But Lloyd replied that he wanted to be the balance type, just like Oscar Sage. So Oscar Sage asked what he was supposed to do in that case. Should he give him more private lessons, or perhaps research a way for someone to change their own mana type? In the end, Lloyd became especially interested in the part about private lessons. Now, back in the present, Oscar Sage looked back on that memory and thought that Lloyd, that little brat, truly was a man of his word. No matter how much he tried to act mature, he was still just a child. Suddenly, Oscar Crushen was awakened by an announcement coming from the transmission room, calling him to Laboratory 4202. While riding the elevator, he thought that he still needed to unlock more magic circuits, but at least his condition had already improved. On top of that, during the unlocking process, he gained 2 more mana lines, and had finally reached level 2. He then went to Maxim Bisk's office, where the man asked how he was feeling. According to Frank, he had been recovering his memories, right? At that moment, Oscar Sage realized that the current elder of the Magic Tower, Maxim Bisk, had merely been a junior back when he himself was still active. The man was now the elder of the Magic Tower, 45 years old, and that caused a strange feeling inside Oscar Sage. The guy who used to call him senior was now an important elder of the tower. Even so, he had always known that Maxim Bisk was diligent and talented, the kind of person destined to become a great mage in the future. Back then, he was always following Oscar Sage around, calling him senior and later tower master. Because of that, deep down, Oscar Sage felt proud when he realized the man had truly worked hard. Maxim Bisk found it strange that he was suddenly smiling to himself for no reason, but soon returned to the main subject. He explained that he had received a report stating that the head of the Gordon family and the current leader of the house had died, then asked if Oscar Crushen had anything to say about it. He answered that he did not, but stated that they had probably died for an appropriate reason, considering they had tried to assassinate him. Then he placed a document on the table, explaining that the elixir had been poisoned, and that the bag of money he received was the commission payment for the assassination. Maxim Bisk asked if that was the reason he had been bedridden all this time. After all, Oscar Crushen had only gone there to settle matters with them, yet ended up suffering another assassination attempt. After analyzing the documents, Maxim Bisk said everything appeared legitimate, and that he would treat the case as self-defense. Oscar Crushen thanked him and took the opportunity to ask for a favor. He wanted to meet the master of the Magic Tower. Maxim Bisk replied that it would not be difficult, since he frequently discussed magic with her. The problem was that she would only return in approximately 6 months, because she had gone on a business trip to handle an important commission. Hearing that, Oscar Sage found it strange that she would personally leave for something he considered trivial. Then he realized that the Archmage was probably absent. Right after that, he asked what the current level of the Tower Master was. Maxim Bisk answered that she was a level 7 High Mage. The moment he heard that, Oscar Sage thought that at her age, he had already been level 9. With the talent that woman possessed, she should at least be level 8. After that, Maxim Bisk commented that the report also described an extremely well-executed horizontal slash on the victims' bodies. Then he asked if Oscar Crushen had returned to practicing offensive magic. Oscar Crushen answered that he had, because he was always training. The elder then said that was fine, and ended the conversation for the day, dismissing the boy. Right after he left, the Vice Tower Master entered the office. It was Hamel Glimwitz. He commented that he had actually come to ask Maxim Bisk not to be so harsh on that child, but apparently he had arrived too late. Maxim Bisk replied that he needed to be a little strict in order to prevent the boy from getting involved in even more trouble in the future. Then Hamel Glimwitz commented that he cared a lot about that boy, and he knew Maxim Bisk cared as well. At that moment, Maxim Bisk remembered the windshield Oscar Crushen used to block his attack. That technique was definitely not something someone could learn overnight. The boy had truly been training seriously. He realized that Oscar Crushen was working harder than anyone else. After that, the two left the office to participate in the elders meeting. Later, after the meeting ended, Oscar Crushen decided to go to the greenhouse, precisely because he had dreamed about his former disciples in that place. While walking around there, a man suddenly approached him. Oscar Sage did not recognize who he was at first, but soon the man introduced himself as Whiter. He commented that it was truly unfortunate that Oscar Crushen had lost his memories. Then he explained that he was responsible for taking care of and managing every corner of that tower. So Oscar Crushen asked if the rumor about his memory loss had really spread that far. But when Whiter called him young Master Oscar, he ended up confused. Then Whiter explained that he had worked at the tower since the time of the great mage Oscar Sage. Because of that, people called the boy young Oscar, since the two of them shared the same name. Hearing that, Oscar Crushen replied that it was a great way to differentiate the two of them, and said he liked the nickname. Then he asked if they could continue talking like that. But Whiter replied that it would not be for much longer, because he would soon be leaving the tower. He had already worked there for 40 years and served 3 different tower masters during that time. While countless employees came and went over the years, only he had remained since the old days. And according to Whiter himself, the only reason he stayed there for so long were the words the great mage Oscar Sage said in his speech when he became the tower master. Back then, he stated that everyone who lived in that tower needed to feel proud to be part of it. Whiter said that it might sound foolish to some people, but that speech was exactly what motivated him to keep working at the tower for so long. He was part of the White Tower, and to him, those words carried enormous meaning. But Oscar Sage replied that it was not foolish at all. In fact, it was a very fair reason. Even so, Whiter explained that this was exactly why he had decided decided to leave the tower now. The White Tower was no longer in its best days, especially regarding its structure and finances. Everything was far worse than it used to be. The following month would mark 40 years since he first started working in that place. Then Oscar Crushen asked if he was leaving because of the long service reward. All members of the White Tower, except for mages, received a special medal and a monetary reward upon completing 20 and 40 years of service. Those who reached 40 years received 200,000 bells, an amount sufficient to buy a house in most major cities. But Whiter replied that he knew very well it would be difficult for the tower to pay that amount in its current situation. Because of that, he could not accept the reward knowing the tower's financial condition. No matter what other people said, that place was practically his second home. Hearing that, Oscar Sage realized he had no idea the tower's situation was truly that bad. At that moment, he began questioning himself. Who was he to belittle the efforts of others? How had the White Tower ended up like this? The other towers were growing while they were being left behind. On the other hand, all he possessed were empty titles. War hero, savior of humanity, grand names that were useless in practice, since the tower could not even pay the rewards of people who dedicated entire decades of their lives to that place. As he clenched his fist in anger, Whiter noticed that his hand was bleeding, so he asked why he was clenching his fists so tightly. Right after that, Oscar Crushen asked when he intended to leave. Whiter answered that it would be in 2 weeks, but before that he would head to the infirmary to take care of that wound. But Oscar Crushen said he hoped Whiter would continue being his conversation partner, because he would not need to leave. Then he promised that he would find a way to solve the situation. He would make that tower earn a lot of money. However, after he was alone, he began thinking about what he could actually do. Up until that moment, the only things coming to mind were research, classes, and magical commissions. The problem was that those things took time to generate profit. On top of the fact that he was still only a level 2 mage, he needed something that could truly make money fast. And that was when he remembered the potion business. Earlier, while reading old newspapers, he found something extremely interesting. At that moment, he realized exactly what he was going to do. Later, in the Vice Tower Master's office, a mage was angrily arguing with Maxim Bisk, saying that the situation could no longer be ignored and that things had already gone too far. Maxim Bisk replied that he knew very well that it was wrong, but said that the culprit was reflecting on his actions. That woman was Feidenlein, the elder responsible for the tower's finances. She then answered that the boy's habit of stealing funds was only getting worse. But Maxim Bisk responded coldly that she did not need to worry so much, because there was not much money in that tower to steal anyway. Annoyed, Feidenlein said that he also did not need to answer everything like that, and suggested simply throwing the boy into solitary confinement. But Maxim Bisk asked if she really wanted to place a level 1 brat in isolated training inside a solitary cell. While the two argued, the Vice Tower Master simply drank his tea in silence, wondering if that was truly a conversation between two respected elders. Then he commented that he agreed with Maxim Bisk because that punishment was far too severe. It would not correct the boy, it would simply be torture. So he suggested something different. They could triple the costs of his research as punishment. Hearing that, Feidenlein indignantly asked if it would only be tripled, but the Vice ignored the complaint and immediately changed the subject. According to him, the tower's financial situation had already reached a critical point. There were countless facilities that were no longer even being used. If they sold the equipment from the production chamber, they could survive for another 3 months. Otherwise, they might truly have to shut the doors for good. However, the Vice Master answered that he would not allow that. The White Tower was a magic tower, a place created to study magic and share knowledge. They could not sell the future of the people there just to survive for a few more months. Then Feidenlein asked if he truly believed there was still any future left for the tower. She said she had been waiting for change for 20 years. After that, she commented that he did not need to answer immediately, but even if some genius capable of saving the tower appeared, that probably still would not be enough. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. The Vice allowed the person to enter, and the one who appeared was Oscar Crushen himself. As soon as he entered, he said he had a suggestion. He wanted to start a business. Immediately, Feidenlein began mocking him, saying that it was funny coming from the very person who had embezzled research funds just a few days ago. And now he wanted to open a business? It sounded like a joke. But Oscar Crushen replied that he had found an interesting article in some old newspapers. The Vinci district had gone into lockdown because of a terrible flu outbreak. The Vice replied that he had also read about it. It was the Cadena flu, a disease that currently had no cure. In the past, the White Tower had developed a vaccine for that disease, but the formula had been destroyed in a fire 20 years ago. Then Oscar Crushen answered yes, and explained that not even the Blue Tower, which completely dominated the potion market, had managed to recreate the vaccine, and that was exactly where he wanted to step in. He declared that he would sell vaccines against the Cadena flu. The White Tower once held a monopoly over that vaccine in the past, and he intended to bring that monopoly back. Hearing that, Feidenlein replied that it was never worth listening to his ideas. Various magical and pharmaceutical companies had invested enormous amounts trying to recreate that vaccine, but no one had managed to discover the formula again. Then she asked if he truly believed he could accomplish something that so many people had failed to do. After all, he was just a 20-year-old brat who embezzled research funds. But Oscar Crushen calmly calmly replied that yes, everyone had failed, and maybe he really was just a 20-year-old rookie, but he was still a genius nonetheless. Had she forgotten that? However, Fidenline completely lost her patience and started shouting, reminding everyone of all the money he had embezzled and all the problems he had already caused for the tower. Then she asked how he still had the courage to call himself a genius after all that. Before the argument could escalate even further, the vice asked her to calm down. According to him, what Oscar Crushen was proposing was an official investment and a real opportunity for the White Magic Tower. He understood that Fidenline was responsible for the finances, but even so, she was being far too rude. Then she apologized. While watching all of that, Oscar Sage thought that, honestly, that woman's reasons for hating him were actually understandable. Up until now, he really had not done anything useful for the tower. Even so, he asked them to consider his proposal. But before answering, the Vice Master asked if he was absolutely certain that the case mentioned in the newspaper was really the Cadena flu. Then Oscar Crushen simply told them to turn the page of the newspaper. It stated that Archbishop Baldwin of the Elterra Order had suddenly changed his plans during the pilgrimage. Oscar Crushen then explained that he would remain in Searing for an entire month performing blessing prayers, but that seemed extremely strange. Up until that point, the order had only stopped in truly major cities. The Elterra Order worshipped the Earth Mother and had 7 archbishops, who were supposed to be the organization's most honorable members, practically the absolute leaders of the faith. However, in practice, the situation was quite different. For someone to become a cardinal, the second highest rank in the order, it was necessary to raise an absurd amount of campaign money. Because of that, according to Oscar Crushen, those visits worked almost like public events for the cities. The rulers and merchants themselves financed everything. In the end, everyone benefited. The archbishops gained money and political support, while the cities received publicity, and the rulers projected the image that they cared about the people. Even so, stopping in Searing was still strange. The city might have been important in the past, but it was becoming smaller and more decadent every year. Besides, it made no sense to hold blessing prayers in a practically barren land. That was when they explained the official route of the Elterra Order's pilgrimage. They would pass through Searing, Mosque, Melbourne, Greenway, and finally Vinci. And that was exactly the issue. Archbishop Baldwin had spent an entire month in Knox before heading to Searing. He would also stay a month in Mosque and another month in Melbourne. Everything gave the impression that he was trying to delay his arrival in Vinci as much as possible. If any incident happened during the pilgrimage, the people of the Elterra Order believed it meant that the Earth Goddess had been offended. For an archbishop trying to become a cardinal, that would practically be a political death sentence, because it would completely destroy his campaign. Then Maxim Bisk asked if Archbishop Baldwin already knew that the Cadena flu was spreading in Vinci and was simply waiting for the situation to improve before going there. Oscar Crushen answered that he interpreted everything exactly that way. Elder Fidenline admitted that it had been a very good analysis, especially coming from a theoretical mage like him. Even so, she made it clear that it was still only a theory. Soon after, the Vice explained that he completely understood his point, but the White Tower could not officially sponsor him. If they did, they would not be able to pay the other mages in the tower. Still, he was willing to invest his own personal money. Elder Fidenline was even surprised by that, but the Vice simply asked if 30,000 coins would be enough to get started. Of course, Oscar Crushen accepted immediately, although he knew that amount was far from sufficient. He immediately went to the production chamber and started Plan B. The equipment was actually decent, and he was also receiving help from Frank. He knew there was a lot of work ahead of him, but he was determined to do everything properly. After being inactive for so long, it was finally time to truly return to work. When he managed to make the reagent function, he realized the moment had come. He bottled the first mixture while thinking about the phrase that a true master never loses his touch. It was only an energy tonic used for practice, but it seemed he had worried for nothing. Meanwhile, Frank appeared carrying so many things that he complained his back was about to break. He had managed to get all the missing herbs and asked if there was any water to drink. Then Oscar Crushen handed him a recovery potion. Frank took a generous gulp, immediately felt his body revitalized, and commented that it was even warm, asking if it had been made recently. Oscar Crushen replied that it had, and explained that the ingredients were in excellent condition. Frank became proud and said that he had picked the best herbs available, so much so that the seller had even gotten angry at him. Then Oscar Crushen joked that with eyes like his, he should become a merchant instead of a mage. Frank answered that he would do that when the White Tower went bankrupt, but he immediately got smacked on the head afterward. Even Oscar Crushen apologized, though he admitted he could not hold himself back. After that, Frank asked what he needed to do now. Elder Fidenline simply ordered him to help. Oscar Sage realized that even though she had been so harsh toward him before, in the end she was still helping in her own way. He started by carrying the ingredients, although he thought he did not really need an assistant. Currently, the White Tower was full of troublesome children who, despite being extremely talented, clearly had a few screws loose. Even so, if those children started acting more sensibly, they could contribute a lot to the tower, and one of those people was Frank Sirius himself. Little by little, Oscar Sage was becoming more and more curious about that boy. Then Frank commented that he had noticed something strange. Almost everything Oscar Crushen bought was poisonous. Black lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and mirva leaves were examples of that. Then Oscar Crushen explained that something being poisonous did not mean it could not be used in medicine. Frank replied that he knew how to detoxify those things. You just had to place the herbs in boiling water for 12 hours. But Oscar Crushen explained that method had a major problem because the nutrients also disappeared in the process. Then he asked if Frank had ever eaten those steamed bean cakes. By using a steamer to detoxify the herbs, it was possible to preserve almost all the nutrients. With that method, they could retain around 98% of the herb's properties. Frank was impressed and asked if that was really true. If it was, they could easily monopolize the potion market. Oscar Crushen replied that yes, and that was exactly how the White Tower had dominated the market in the past. At that moment, he was still only softening the ingredients to make detoxification easier. The real process consisted of air drainage. He literally sucked all the poison out of the herbs, transformed it into a toxic cloud, and then condensed everything, separating each type of toxin. After finishing the process, Oscar Crushen explained that the remaining vapor no longer contained any toxins. All they had to do was mix everything in the correct proportions. With that, he easily managed to create the medicine for the Cadena flu. Frank was stunned and asked if it had really been that easy. Oscar Crushen answered yes and said that now Frank himself could try it. Of course, Frank became nervous because he had never done anything like that before. Even so, he started by using air drainage. Watching everything closely, Oscar Sage noticed that his mana control seemed relatively stable. It was not bad, but it was not anything extraordinary either. Still, it was already impressive for someone at his level. Frank managed to levitate the poison bubble in the air, but he did not have enough skill to use simultaneous magic. That normally required a level 4 or 5 mage, while he was still only level 3. Oscar Crushen replied that he could teach that easily. According to him, all someone had to do was imagine the mind divided into sections. On the left side, the person used one spell. On the right side, they used another. Frank thought hard about it and struggled at first, but after insisting for a while, he actually managed to make it work. Then Oscar Crushen congratulated him, saying that he had just used 2 spells simultaneously for the first time. Frank immediately celebrated, saying he had no idea it was that easy. Then he asked why they had hidden that technique for so long. Oscar Crushen replied that it was pure greed. The veterans did not want to give away for free a technique that had taken them so long to learn. Over the years, that eventually became tradition among mages, but on a bloody battlefield, that kind of tradition was nothing more than a setback. To survive, mages needed to share techniques and constantly exchange knowledge. In his view, the White Tower urgently needed a more interactive style of teaching and a true culture of knowledge sharing. While observing Frank, he realized the boy had done an excellent job and commented that he truly had talent for it. Frank, a little embarrassed, replied that he had only managed because the explanation had been so good. There were still many ingredients left, so they decided to begin the full production process. Oscar Crushen commented that he had a much larger steamer and that they could finally speed everything up from that point onward. A few hours later, Frank was already completely exhausted on the floor, complaining that he was about to die from overworking. Even so, the result had been impressive. Oscar Crushen counted a total of 514 bottles produced. However, at that moment, Maxim Bisk appeared, bringing troubling news. Niltec, the pharmaceutical company connected to the Blue Tower, had confirmed a visit to Siren just 1 hour earlier, and the reason for the meeting was painfully obvious. They were going to meet Archbishop Baldwin. Maxim Bisk commented that they might already be too late. Then Oscar Sage realized that the Blue Tower had probably been planning this from the very beginning. Maxim Bisk further explained that if they secured the contract first, all of the White Tower's efforts would amount to nothing. Hearing that, Frank immediately started losing hope, but Oscar Crushen rejected the idea at once. According to him, it was not over yet. If he remembered correctly, the Cadena flu was classified as a Class B disaster. In that case, there was still one thing they could try. Then he looked at Maxim Bisk and asked if he could still fly fast. Later, at a lodging located in Siren, the guests from the Blue Tower finally arrived to visit Archbishop Baldwin of the Eltera Order. They introduced themselves as Moira Main, a level 5 mage from the Blue Tower, and Neil Brion, director of the pharmaceutical company Niltec. Archbishop Baldwin received them normally and asked how the development of the cure for the Cadena flu was progressing. Moira Main replied that everything was going very well. The Archbishop then commented that he had great expectations for them and asked when they would be able to complete it. Moira Main explained that only a few clinical tests remained. Right after that, Neil Brion added that if the results were positive, they would obtain authorization from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. Even so, Moira Main explained that those tests would still take 1 or 2 days to complete. However, Archbishop Baldwin seemed far more concerned about another issue. He wanted to know when the medicine would actually be available for sale. After a brief silence, Moira Main replied that perhaps it would take around half a year. Archbishop Baldwin was completely shocked. He immediately asked how that was possible, since he needed to go to Vinci in only 4 months. Moira Main tried to explain that the production schedule could not simply be accelerated like that. But before the conversation could continue, someone suddenly knocked on the door. It was an unexpected visitor. The person who entered the room was Oscar Crushen. Introducing himself as a mage from the White Tower, he explained that he was there to make an interesting proposal. Archbishop Baldwin asked what what a member of the White Tower wanted there. Oscar Crushen then replied that he had come precisely to negotiate the sale of the cure for the Cadena flu. The Archbishop immediately understood the situation and commented that the timing was perfect, since both groups were there for exactly the same reason. He then added that, apparently the Blue Tower had not prepared as well as they had imagined. Hearing that, Oscar Crushen simply replied that this was excellent, because the White Tower was ready to negotiate at that very moment. Moira Main immediately objected, saying that was impossible. According to him, the White Tower did not possess enough money or technology to develop a cure of that level. However, Archbishop Baldwin completely ignored his complaint and asked what Oscar's surname was. He politely answered that it was Crushen. Then the Archbishop said that was fine and directly asked whether Oscar Crushen truly possessed the cure. Without hesitation, he replied that he would never dare lie to an Archbishop of the Altera Order. Right after that, he showed only a small sample of the medicine. Archbishop Baldwin asked how long the White Tower would need to begin large-scale production if they reached an agreement. Meanwhile, Moira Main kept trying to interrupt the conversation, clearly desperate. Irritated, the Archbishop asked why he was shouting so much. Then he stated that if the Blue Tower had arrived unprepared, that was their own fault. Realizing he was losing ground, Moira Main completely changed his approach. He asked whether Oscar Crushen already possessed official approval from the Empire's AEM. Oscar Crushen calmly answered that he did not. At that very moment, Moira Main smiled and said he knew it. According to him, the White Tower's situation was no different from the Blue Tower's. Neither side could distribute the medicine on a massive scale without official approval. However, considering the Blue Tower's long history and influence, they would receive authorization first. Oscar Crushen admitted that it was a fair point, but he found it amusing to hear someone from the Blue Tower talking about tradition and history in front of a mage from the White Tower, an organization even older. Irritated, Moira Main ordered him to take back what he had just said. But Oscar Crushen continued by asking which magical tower had been the first in continental history. Without patience, Moira Main replied that the difference between the towers was only 5 years. Then Oscar Crushen coldly responded that those 5 years were a distance that would never be surpassed, not even in 1,000 years. That was how history worked. He also reminded him that 20 years earlier, the White Tower's monopoly over the potion market had been far greater than anything the Blue Tower had ever managed to build. Moira Main argued back, saying that nobody cared about the past anymore. But Oscar Crushen asked whether he truly believed that. At that moment, everyone felt a terrifying pressure coming from him. The atmosphere in the room completely changed, as he said that perhaps he needed to remind everyone there that the past always comes back to collect its debt. Before the situation could escalate even further, a messenger from the Order rushed into the room, apologizing for the interruption. According to him, there was an urgent call for Archbishop Baldwin. It was Lord Vinci. As soon as the call began, Lord Vinci immediately thanked the Archbishop for the immense kindness of sending the cure for the Cadena flu. Archbishop Baldwin was completely confused and asked what he was talking about. Then Lord Vinci explained that an elder from the White Tower had said the medicine was being secretly prepared specifically to help them. According to him, the Archbishop deserved all the gratitude because the patients who had taken the cure had completely recovered in just a few hours. It was practically a miracle. Baldwin asked if he was certain there were no side effects. Lord Vinci replied that, so far nothing had appeared, and that was excellent news. In fact, he wanted to know when the second batch would be ready. He had asked the elder from the White Tower, but the elder said that responsibility should remain with the Archbishop. Baldwin replied that yes, of course. He said he would send the second batch as soon as it was ready, and that it would not take long. After hanging up the phone, he looked at Oscar Crushen and asked if that had truly been his doing. Oscar Crushen simply replied that he had arrived at a good time, sir. Moira Main said that this went against the AM's laws, and that he needed to be punished immediately. However, Oscar Crushen replied that he did not seem to know his own laws very well. He commented that the last 20 years must have been far too peaceful, because apparently everyone had forgotten what happened in the past. Then he explained that, 20 years earlier, the weapon of war that had killed the most people during the fight against the demons had actually been a pandemic. Even though the mages produced treatments quickly, the AM took far too long to approve them. Because of that, His Majesty added a declaration to Article 42, Clause 8, stating that treatments intended for the wounded during wartime situations would be classified as special treatments and would not be affected by either the AM's laws or the Empire's laws. Moira Main argued back, saying that they were not at war, but Oscar Crushen explained that there were 3 situations considered a state of war. The first was a territorial war, the second, a revolution, and the third, a disaster above Class B. The Cadena flu epidemic was considered a Class B natural disaster, so there was no need to follow the AM's laws in that case. Neil Breon said that if the White Tower had managed to do it, then they could do it as well. He declared that they would immediately send the treatment to the state of Vinci. However, Baldwin replied that they still did not understand the situation. The race had already ended the moment the White Tower's treatment reached the state of Vinci. On top of that, Lord Vinci now believed he was working together with the White Tower, so there was no turning back anymore. Neil Breon tried to suggest that they could lower the price, but Baldwin lost his patience and asked if he truly believed his image could be bought with money. After that, he ordered the two of them to leave his office immediately because he was already tired of their nonsense. As he was leaving, Moira Main passed by Oscar Crushen and said that he would pay for this. Oscar Crushen calmly replied that he had already registered the treatment's patent as well. Then he warned them that if they wanted to sell the treatment they produced themselves, they had better pay the White Tower's fees. Otherwise, they could simply throw everything away. Moira Main left even more furious than before. Neil Breon, on the other hand, merely walked past him calmly. At that moment, Oscar Sage noticed a different scent. It was a refreshing and very distinctive mint aroma. He immediately thought that this must be the man who had ordered his assassination. As soon as the doors closed, the Archbishop asked the boy to sit down because they could finally have a real conversation. Right after that, he asked whether they should discuss the price first, and wanted to know the amount. The Blue Tower had asked for 2 million bells. Moira Main had stated that if the Blue Tower wanted 2, then they would ask for 5. However, later he ended up returning with a check worth 10 million for Fedenline, who became extremely happy. She told the brat that she knew he could do it, and commented that Maxim Bisk had believed in him from the very beginning. The Vice Master asked how that had happened, because not even the Archbishop usually paid that much. Then Oscar Crushen explained that a large part of that amount came from additional fees, advertising fees. He explained that the White Tower would make an official announcement claiming that Archbishop Baldwin had received a revelation regarding the emergence of the Kadena flu, and that, thanks to this revelation, they had managed to prepare the antidotes quickly. Since the Archbishop was seeking a cardinal position, he ended up paying much more because of his own image, and honestly, he had enjoyed that deal quite a lot. The Vice Master was impressed and commented that it had been incredible. The disciplinary action only required 3 times the embezzled amount, but Oscar Crushen had brought back 400 times more than that. Fedenline then declared that there would no longer be any disciplinary action against him, and the Vice Master also promised his full support from that moment onward. After that, Oscar Crushen requested several level 4 mages or above as quickly as possible. The Vice Master then asked Fedenly to place an announcement in the Magic Tower stating that the potion production laboratory was looking for level 4 mages or higher. In addition to the payment, everyone would also receive meat with every meal. A few hours later, the laboratory was already packed with interested people, mainly because of the meat. Oscar Crushen tried to organize everyone, but nobody stopped talking, so he used a sound binding spell so powerful that it nearly left everyone deaf. After finally achieving silence, he asked for everyone's attention. He explained that the reason they had gathered there was the production of vaccines and antidotes for the Kadena flu, and that he needed the help of everyone present. Even so, several people started whispering among themselves, asking whether Oscar Crushen had really been the one to gather everyone there. Some believed that it had to be just another one of his scams. Then Oscar Crushen asked Frank whether people truly disliked him that much. Frank replied that it was obvious. All anyone had to do was think about everything he had done so far. He said that Oscar's personality was irritating and arrogant, that he had wasted resources, embezzled money, and that all he ever did was drink alcohol. Oscar Sage thought that, looking at it that way, it really did seem pretty bad. One of the female mages then raised her hand and asked if she could ask a few questions. She commented that the White Tower's production methods had been lost and wanted to know how they were supposed to accomplish all of this. Oscar Crushen simply replied that he had recovered everything. The mage looked surprised and asked whether he was sure the effects had already been proven. He answered yes, and even explained that the contract with the Order had already been finalized. She then commented that it all had to be worth a fortune. She said that if the production method were revealed, offering meat with meals almost sounded like a joke. After that, she asked why he was entrusting such precious information to all of them. Oscar Crushen replied that he truly did not understand why everyone was still in the White Tower if they thought that way. The mage argued back, saying that was not the attitude of someone asking their superiors for help. She commented that perhaps she had wasted her time there, and that she did not know what the great genius intended, but this was not something only one person needed to hear. Then Oscar Crushen answered that he knew exactly what every single one of them had given up for the White Tower. He started with the mage herself, saying that she was the level 5 mage Lena White, 25 years old. He explained that because of her talent and judgment skills, 7 different organizations, including the Red Tower, had tried to recruit her, yet she still chose to join the White Tower. Then he continued talking about the others as well, including Karok Dryan, a level 5 mage who was 26 years old. The royal palace knew very well about Karok Dryan's abilities in magical martial arts. They had even offered him a position as a royal mage, but he refused without hesitation. Next came Deckert Rhine, a level 5 mage, also 26 years old. The Imperial Academy had tried to hire him 4 different times for an instructor position, but he rejected every single offer. There was also Safia Rose, a level 4 mage who was only 23 years old. Because of her extremely creative abilities in alchemy, the Golden Tower had attempted to recruit her several times as well, but she too chose to remain in the White Tower. Oscar Crushen then explained that it was not limited to just them. Many of the others present in that room had gone through the exact same thing. All of them had received excellent offers, invitations from major organizations, and tempting proposals, yet they still decided to remain in the White Tower. Lena White asked whether the elders knew about all those secret recruitment meetings. Oscar Crushen replied that that they did. They knew everything, but pretended not to notice because they did not want to place even more weight on their shoulders. Then he began speaking in a more serious tone. He said that the White Tower was going through the coldest winter in its entire history, and even in that miserable situation, where everyone there could have simply gone to better and more comfortable places, they still chose to remain in that cold beside the tower. Because of that, he asked who else he was supposed to trust, if not them. However, Frank did not fall for that emotional speech, and replied that those crocodile tears would not fool anyone. So Oscar Crushing simply told him to stop wasting time and get to work already, because otherwise they would end up doing everything by themselves. Lena White became embarrassed, quietly cleared her throat, and gathered the courage to return to her workstation as well. After that, the others slowly began moving too, and the laboratory finally became active. Frank asked whether those words had actually worked. Oscar Crushing replied that apparently they had, but immediately took the opportunity to warn everyone in advance that the promised meat was not pork. At the same moment, speculation started everywhere. Some thought it might be chicken, others immediately began complaining, saying it was probably rat meat. However, Oscar Crushing replied that it would be real steak. As soon as they heard that, the entire laboratory celebrated excitedly. Thanks to everyone's collective effort, the vaccines were completed successfully, and even exceeded the original target by 140%. 1 week later, several flower petals arranged in the shape of a heart appeared gathered inside the greenhouse. They had been left there by Whiter, which meant he had probably returned. Oscar Crushing was certain that the tower's vice master had found him somewhere, and practically dragged him back. Later, he sat inside the greenhouse reading the morning newspaper. The main headline officially announced the end of the pandemic, only 2 days after the antidotes against the Cadena flu had been distributed. The newspapers were already calling it the beginning of the White Tower's resurrection. On the front page, Oscar Crushing himself also appeared, having been nominated as a candidate for the Peace Award of the Year. In the photo, he was shown shaking hands with Archbishop Baldwin, who publicly declared that the boy was a messenger of the goddess. Oscar Sage watched everything happening, and thought things were going surprisingly well. Soon after, Frank appeared extremely excited, saying that vaccine orders kept pouring in non-stop. Several territories were placing orders, including the northern territories. Even the imperial family had submitted requests. Oscar Crushing replied that it was obvious. If rulers truly cared about the lives of their citizens, then naturally they would ask for vaccines. But Frank commented that the excitement would not last forever. Oscar Crushing immediately asked if he was an idiot, because it was obvious the demand would not be eternal. Frank answered that he was not stupid either. Once the vaccination campaign ended, nobody would have any reason to keep buying vaccines. Then Oscar Crushing explained that, with the money they had already earned, the White Tower would not need to worry for quite a long time. Besides that, he was also preparing another potion, one that would always have demand in the market. Frank asked if he was talking about the Tier of the Stars. However, Oscar Crushing replied that he was not. He explained that, for now, they would only sell low and mid-level potions. The Tier of the Stars was the most famous potion among the recovered White Tower recipes. It was practically a miracle potion, known through legend as something capable of even bringing the dead back to life. Because of that, releasing it would create enormous repercussions, but doing so now would only attract unnecessary attention. This time, Oscar Crushing was playing cautiously. He was using the Archbishop as a shield within that massive political game. Then he remembered Frank's comment and said they could already begin gathering the necessary ingredients. Frank immediately replied that he should never have mentioned it. Oscar Crushing started listing the ingredients he needed, including lantos leaves, bison stems, and several other rare materials. Frank complained right away, saying that those two ingredients alone would already be difficult to obtain. Oscar Crushing found that strange and asked what he meant, since they were products from Siren. Then Frank explained that had been a long time ago. The cultivated herb fields in Siren had been completely destroyed. Later, Oscar Crushing decided to personally travel to Siren because he simply could not believe him. While they walked, Frank asked if there was really any need to walk all the way to a place that even carriages could not reach. Oscar Crushing told him to stop being dramatic and said they had already walked 10 miles, so they were almost there. Frank looked confused and asked why he was using a unit of measurement that had disappeared 18 years ago. Oscar Crushing asked if people no longer used miles. Then Frank explained that after the war, all distance measurements had been standardized into meters. Pounds had also been replaced by grams. Oscar Crushing looked surprised and asked if even weight measurements had changed. Frank answered yes, because pounds were far more complicated to calculate. At the end of that enormous field, the two finally spotted a small cabin. Inside was a somewhat ill-tempered old man who asked if they had walked all the way up from down there. Frank replied that they had, because the carriage could only leave them at the entrance. But suddenly, several cars appeared crossing through the field, crushing flowers along the way. The man in the first car asked the old man if he would finally sell the property that day. Then a huge and intimidating man stepped out of the cabin, saying there was absolutely no chance of that happening. Even if they offered him a castle in exchange, he would never sell that place. The man with the hat then asked why he insisted on making negotiations so difficult. He commented that playing hard to get only worked during the first few days. That man was Devor Powell, known for being an extremely aggressive businessman. man. Even so, the herbalist Ivan did not seem willing to give in. Devor Powal said he was doing it for Ivan's own good. All he had to do was sell the property, take the money, and live happily for the rest of his life. He also commented that once factories started appearing around the area, the value of that land would plummet. But Ivan merely replied that it was funny hearing that. As long as he remained there, no construction permit for factories would ever set foot on that land. Devor Powal finally gave up on the argument for the day and ordered his men to retreat. Before leaving, he casually commented that they might have accidentally stepped on the old man's herbs. Then he tossed a bundle of money onto the ground as if it were compensation and drove away with his cars. Devor Powal realized those brats were from the White Magic Tower. When he read the newspaper and saw the tower featured on the front page, he realized they were gaining attention again. Irritated, he smacked the driver over the head with the newspaper for not warning him earlier. In his mind, that was a huge problem, because those kids could end up helping that damned Ivan, and that absolutely could not happen. The interest on his loans was becoming harder and harder to pay, and he needed to get his hands on that land no matter the cost. Then he asked if the mercenaries had already been hired. The plan was simple: kill Ivan and make it look like he had disappeared. They needed to seize that territory at any cost. However, the other man reminded him that the White Tower mages might continue staying at the herb farm. Even so, Devor Powal replied that they would kill them too if they got in the way. The man looked worried and said that if the 4 great magic towers became involved, it would turn into a massive problem, especially with Ivan in the middle of it all. But Devor Powal merely scoffed at the idea, saying that the 4 great towers were a thing of the past and that the White Tower was practically bankrupt. Later that night, while watching the starry sky as they lay in the field, Frant commented that he liked the old herbalist. He found it strange how Ivan had allowed them to stay there, offered them food, and even let them sleep on the property despite barely knowing them. Besides that, the old man genuinely seemed loyal to the White Tower. Curious, Frant asked who those people from earlier were. Ivan then explained that the man was a crazy bastard named Devor Powal. To achieve his goals, he kidnapped, threatened, and even murdered people without hesitation. It had all started 3 years earlier, when they began buying land throughout the region. They had managed to acquire practically everything except his property. Since then, countless herbalists had left Siren or simply disappeared. Their goal was to turn the place into the largest herb factory on the continent. Ivan was only still alive because they had not directly touched him yet. Even so, he explained that they were at a disadvantage. Then he introduced himself as a human cultural heritage of herb cultivation. Hearing that, Frank asked if he received protection from the imperial family. Ivan confirmed that he did, and said that was precisely why he was still alive in that house. Oscar Crushen commented that those lands could bring in an enormous fortune, and asked why Ivan simply did not sell everything. The old man replied that the question was obvious. He loved that place. That land had been his home since birth, and it would remain so until the day he died. Oscar Sage, watching all of that in the present, thought Ivan truly was a good person. Meanwhile, Frank found the old man's embarrassed manner amusing when he returned inside the house. After that, he commented on how beautiful the field was, and how many more stars could be seen there compared to the city. He also said that he wished to become a shining star like that someday, just like a true genius. Oscar Crushen replied that Frank was impressive as well. He made it clear that he was not saying that lightly. He was not the type of person who praised others without reason, so Frank should actually feel grateful. Oscar Sage found that strange, because honestly, he could not understand why the young Oscar Crushen kept calling that boy a problematic child. Soon after, Frank started talking about the stars again, and Oscar Crushen agreed that in Siren they truly were much more beautiful. In his time, the nights had been far too bright because of streetlights and cars, making it difficult to properly see the sky. Thinking about it, he ended up realizing that the inconvenience of that ancient era carried a certain kind of romance. Then Frank asked if they truly intended to revive Siren's herb industry. Oscar Crushen replied that he did not think it was impossible. They would still need to discuss the details more carefully with Elder Ivan, but at that very moment he sensed something strange. A killing intent. He detected 4 people approaching. Frank did not sense anything at all. Oscar Sage then realized that, despite his decent level, Frank still could not detect presences like that, but it was obvious those people had not come with good intentions. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen calmly prepared himself to receive the guests. On the other side, one of the assassins asked why they had accepted the job this time, since before they had refused to kill that man. The oldest one replied that he did not care about the details. He only wanted the money. The last one told them to stop talking, because there could be a mage nearby. The 3 were known as the Gunslinger Jack Gang. The oldest commented that, if the mages truly were from the White Tower, then that was actually a relief. The real problem would be if they belonged to other towers. Meanwhile, another member seemed overly excited about the idea of fighting a mage, and asked the leader if he could go first. With a lockpick kit in hand, he easily opened the cabin door, assuming old Ivan was sleeping inside. The ease of it all even bored him, but the moment he pulled back the blankets, he realized too late that it was not Ivan lying there. It was Oscar Crushen. In the very same instant, Oscar Crushen fired a wind bullet directly into his head. The projectile pierced through the man's brain immediately. After killing the assassin, he realized just how useful that new spell was. The young Oscar Crushen had created that magic by reinterpreting basic magic. It was practically a spell that copied the principle of a firearm using wind magic. He even commented to himself that the killing power had been greater than he expected. From what he could sense, there were still 3 enemies remaining, but then he noticed something strange. Outside, he could only sense 2. The leader asked what he had done to Max. Oscar Crushen calmly replied that he was sleeping inside and that they should let the man rest. After all, perhaps that sleep would last forever. The old spearman, irritated, called his companion a pathetic bastard and said he had warned them never to lower their guard. Even so, the leader remained calm and said they only wanted to know the herbalist's location. He also stated that they would not hold a grudge over Max's death. Oscar Sage then realized those men truly were professionals. They were not falling for provocations or looking for an unnecessary fight. Even so, Oscar Crushen replied that deep down, they would still hold resentment anyway. The leader then said that if he wanted blood, fine, he could kill everyone there. At that exact moment, the old spearman charged straight at him, but Oscar Crushen blocked the attack using a wind barrier. When he dodged the next strike, the old man admitted that the boy truly was impressive. The old man was genuinely impressed, but his weapon was far from ordinary. He split the spear in half, revealing 2 additional blades. It was about time to end this. Then he charged forward with his new weapons. However, Oscar Crushen replied that this was far more annoying than he had imagined. Right after that, he fired 2 concentrated wind spheres that struck the blades and shattered them as if they were glass. Oscar Crushen commented that the weapon was neither that unique nor that innovative, but at that exact moment, he sensed something strange and immediately moved away from the imminent danger. The old man did not understand why, and soon afterward, a bullet pierced through his head. The one who appeared was none other than the gunslinger Jack himself, saying that this had been disgraceful. Oscar Crushen managed to protect himself at the last second using a windshield. Then Jack commented that if not for that, he would have killed him instantly. Oscar Crushen asked if he had really just killed his own companion. Jack replied that he was not exactly a companion, just a subordinate, someone easy to replace. Oscar Sage thought that this was exactly why criminals were so horrible. Then he asked what kind of toy Jack was using. The gunslinger answered that it was sad to hear someone call it a toy, because that weapon had cost a fortune. At that moment, Oscar Sage noticed the enchantments embedded within it: acceleration, enhancement, and penetration. All 3 spells had been infused into the weapon. Jack asked how he knew that. Then Oscar Crushen replied that he knew because he had failed to block the shot completely. As he spoke, he wiped the blood from his face, since the bullet had grazed him. Jack commented that he was arrogant, but talented enough to act that way. He even asked if he wanted to work alongside him, because the pay would be excellent. But Oscar Crushen refused, saying he would end up with an itch on the back of his neck just like the old man lying dead on the ground. Jack replied that he was right, and said there was no longer any need for conversation. Later, Oscar Crushen was hiding behind a small fence, trying to understand how he had ended up in that situation. A former master of the White Tower crouched on the ground, hiding from bullets. He quickly analyzed the fight. His wind bullets were slower than normal projectiles, especially compared to that special weapon. On top of that, he only had half of his mana remaining, so he could not keep running forever. The only opening Jack ever left was during the reload. After 2 shots, he always needed to reload and would attack again about 1.4 seconds later. Oscar Crushen realized that Jack still had 1 final bullet remaining, so if he resolved everything within 1.24 seconds, he would still have a chance. At that moment, he used acceleration magic on his own body and launched himself forward like a human bullet, while also creating a windshield around himself. Jack pointed the weapon and commented that he really was fast, but no human could withstand the trinity of that gun. The shot would certainly pierce through the shield. However, Oscar Crushen had already prepared a spell to alter the trajectory of the bullet. Jack was shocked. It was impossible for someone to dodge that using acceleration alone. He even thought that perhaps it had been the shield. But when he looked ahead, Oscar Crushen was already standing right in front of him with a wind bullet prepared directly against his forehead. Jack asked how a mere low-level mage could accomplish something like that. Then Oscar Crushen blew his head apart and replied that it was not even worth explaining. After the battle, he picked up the weapon and saw that its name truly was Trinity: acceleration, enhancement, and penetration. It was an absurd weapon, and dealing with it really had been difficult. What Oscar Sage had done was combine friction reduction magic with increased internal durability on the shield. The outer layer was flexible, while the inside was extremely resistant. That was why the bullet failed to pierce through the barrier and instead slid across it. If that had not worked, he would have been the one lying dead on the ground. Oscar Crushen thought that once he returned to the White Tower, he would need to study modern weapons more carefully. But before that, he still needed to save Frank and Ivan. Soon afterward, he sensed 4 presences nearby. He had already dealt with 3 people, which meant there was still 1 assassin remaining. Meanwhile, Frank and Ivan had fled into the middle of the forest and were now facing the final enemy. Frank told Ivan to keep going, saying that he was strong and that he also would not be able to fight properly if the old man kept staying behind and getting in the way. He promised he would catch up soon afterward. Ivan ended up leaving the boy behind, but told him to be careful. The assassin watched the scene and commented that those lies were touching. Then he asked if he had enjoyed his farewell with the old man. Frank asked why he was not chasing Ivan, since he was supposed to be the target. The assassin responded by asking if Frank had truly sent the old man away, believing that would save him. He said that Ivan was the real objective, but he had become curious. He wanted to discover what was so special about the White Tower that made so many people fear its mages. Then he drew his sword and charged to kill Frank first. The young mage responded with a wind slash, but the assassin easily destroyed the magical blade with his sword. Right afterward, he pierced straight through Frank's chest and told him to try doing something more entertaining. He even asked if that was all the 4 great towers amounted to. But then he noticed something strange. The sword had not actually pierced the boy's flesh. Frank calmly grabbed the blade and slit the assassin's throat. Afterward, he apologized, saying that he had a somewhat unique constitution. In truth, the sword strike had not harmed him at all. He even stepped away from the body as it collapsed to the ground, complaining that he had almost gotten blood on his clothes. Oscar Crushen watched everything from afar and realized that Frank was an extremely special mage. Apparently, he possessed the power of the god of wind, a magic capable of transforming parts of the body into wind itself. Since physical attacks simply did not work against him, it was practically an unfair ability, impossible to confront without magic or a key sword. Even Oscar Sage had only seen records of that ability in ancient books. The texts mentioned only the 7th master of the magic tower, an extraordinarily special mage. It was an innate magic, a true blessing. When Oscar Crushen appeared before him, Frank was startled and asked where he had been. The mage replied that he had also been busy and praised his work. Then he asked where Ivan had gone. Frank immediately called out for the old man in concern. He wanted to know where Ivan was, but Oscar Crushen could already sense his energy and assured him that Ivan was safe. When dawn arrived, Ivan embraced Frank and deeply thanked him. He said that if not for him, he would never have lived to see the next sunset. Frank replied that all of this had happened thanks to the other guy, because he himself had barely done anything. But Oscar Crushen immediately corrected him. He said he was wrong. If Frank had not stopped that swordsman, Ivan would most likely have truly died. Frank became very embarrassed and said that, anyway, everything was over now, right? However, Ivan replied that not exactly. He knew very well that Devor Pawwal would try again. He would hire other assassins and do whatever was necessary to take that land. Then Frank asked why that man was so obsessed with the place. Ivan explained that it was the best land in Siren in terms of size and location. On top of that, Siren's fertility had greatly declined over the last 8 years. The reason was the production of magical engineering items in the factories of the western region, which dumped waste and ended up polluting the Bolf River. Ivan continued, saying that if even more factories started being built near that area, there would come a point where their resistance would become meaningless. Since Siren's fertility could never be restored, he would also lose the ability to cultivate herbs. Then Oscar Crushen asked about the loyalty Ivan claimed to owe to the master of the White Tower. He wanted to know if that was related to a promise connected to the tower's 4th master, Renaud de Eos. Ivan was shocked that he knew that story. Meanwhile, Frank had no idea what they were talking about. Oscar Crushen explained that it was an ancient story among herbalists. Long ago, herbalists were viewed poorly. Some were even called witches, because they would gather unknown herbs, boil them in pots, and sell them to people without anyone truly understanding the effects. Because of that, they avoided contact with others and lived as nomads. But then someone appeared who changed everything. A man famous for his extraordinary perception. The 4th master of the Magic Tower, Renaud de Eos. He was the one who brought the herbalists to Siren, a place where they could finally live in peace. Ivan was impressed to hear those words spoken exactly that way. Oscar Crushen replied that he had read it in a history book. Ivan then continued the explanation. He said that, in the end, herbalists from all across the continent gathered in Siren. It was the first time they had ever possessed a true welcoming home. The White Tower had gifted their ancestors both a home and pride. Because of that, they could never abandon the tower. Upon hearing that, Oscar Crushen bowed to Ivan and thanked him for all his efforts during all this time. He said that from now on, the White Tower would stand beside him. Ivan asked if he already had some plan in mind. Frank then commented that if the imperial family discovered that someone had attacked a human cultural heritage site, they would certainly solve the problem. However, Ivan replied that he was not sure the imperial family would be able to act in time. They were extremely competent, but also far too slow to move. If Devor Pawwal launched a large-scale attack before that, everything would be over. But Oscar Crushen replied that there was no need to worry. The imperial family would act very quickly this time, because on that very day he would sign the contract related to the treatment for Cadena flu. Meanwhile, chaos was already unfolding inside Devor Pawwal's office. He shouted for everyone to hurry while hiding money and preparing suitcases to flee. However, the imperial family arrived far faster than he had expected. The guards broke down the door and immediately arrested Devor Pawwal. Superintendent Walker himself, from the Imperial Ministry of Internal Affairs, appeared before him and presented an official document. Devor Pawwal was being arrested for attempted murder, blackmail, illegal acquisition of property, and damage to human cultural heritage. Even so, Devor Pawwal insisted that that he was innocent and nothing more than an honest businessman. Walker replied that the court would decide that. Then he told him to shut up. Devor Powell knew he would not be able to solve the situation on his own. He thought that if he could speak with a certain person, he might still find a way out. So he asked if he could at least smoke his last cigar. Walker completely ignored the request and ordered the guards to handcuff him immediately. As he was being dragged outside, Devor Powell asked if Walker had any idea who he was backing. He said Walker was making a huge mistake. Walker replied that he did not know who was supporting Devor Powell, but he knew very well that he himself was being backed directly by the Emperor. Then they took away his cigar, put the handcuffs on him, and dragged him away. Later, Walker appeared smoking the same confiscated cigar, commenting that even a criminal could have good taste sometimes. One of the guards asked who the man was that could make the imperial family act within a single day. He said he had never seen something happen so quickly before. Walker replied that the order had come from above. The Emperor truly cared a lot about the White Tower. It was a matter between adults. While looking out the window, Walker thought that even he did not fully understand why the Emperor still valued the White Tower so much. It was true that in the past it had accomplished heroic feats, but 20 years had already passed since then. Nowadays, the White Tower no longer possessed the same prestige. Even so, Walker knew that those above him still could not abandon the expectations they had for it. Then he asked the guard Dolan how old he was. The young man replied that he was 23 years old. That meant that 20 years ago, he had only been a 3-year-old child. Walker commented that back then he had been 12 years old. It was the period when humanity had finally achieved true freedom after the war against the demons, and the White Tower had been one of the greatest reasons behind that victory. After that, Walker told Dolan that they still had one more place to visit. Unfortunately, the work was not over yet. Dolan asked what their next assignment would be. Then the superintendent replied that they were going west to issue orders for the nearby factories to immediately stop polluting the Bulf River. That, however, was not even part of the original orders. It was something Walker himself had decided to add. Even without knowing the White Tower deeply, he wanted to reward Oscar Crushen and Frank Sirius for defeating Jack the Gunslinger. Along the way, Dolan even asked if they could stop to buy something, but Walker refused immediately. When the two of them finally returned to the White Tower, Frank asked what they would do now. He even suggested having a few drinks, but Oscar Crushen replied that he first needed to deliver the report to the Vice Master. Then he asked if Frank wanted to come along. However, in the very next instant, the Vice Master appeared right in front of them. Frank was startled and immediately ran away. He simply fled from there. Hamel Glimwitz approached Oscar Crushen, asking whether he had really just seen Frank there or if he was imagining things. Then Oscar Crushen calmly replied that Frank had gone to deal with something urgent. Oscar Crushen thought that, in truth, Frank had not gone to deal with anything at all. He had simply run away from the poor old man. Meanwhile, Hamel Glimwitz already knew that Oscar Crushen had gotten himself involved in yet another major incident, and said that he would hear the report in his office instead. But while they were riding the elevator, Oscar Crushen noticed that the old man seemed somewhat sad. Hamel Glimwitz asked if he had already noticed what was happening with Frank, and Oscar Crushen replied that he had not noticed anything unusual. Then the old man explained that he had received a message from the Sirius family saying that they would be taking Frank away. He did not know the exact reason, but they said they had already spoken with him and made their decision. Later, Oscar Crushen went to Frank's room and entered, asking who exactly Grank Sirius was. Frank explained that he was the youngest son of the largest trading company in the Empire. Then he commented that Oscar Crushen had probably already heard the whole conversation, so Oscar Crushen asked if it was true that he was leaving the White Tower. Frank apologized for not saying anything sooner, but explained that it had been difficult to talk about it. He needed to return to his family, help with the company's business, and also get married. He explained that it was merely an arranged marriage meant to strengthen the company, and that he was not actually dating anyone. Frank even tried to speak lightly about it, saying that the girl seemed pretty, nice, and came from a good family. But Oscar Crushen's concern was something else. He asked whether Frank was really okay with abandoning the tower. The boy replied that there was not much he could do. He said that his talent was only that much. For a long time, he had believed he was special. He thought that by entering the weakest of the towers, the White Tower, he would at least be able to stand at the top of it. But reality was different. He realized that he was not good enough to remain there, and he completely understood his family's decision. Even so, Oscar Crushen said that he was talented. Frank found it amusing to hear that coming from a genius like him, but Oscar Crushen was serious and asked whether he truly wanted to try reaching the top or not. At that moment, Frank's older brother entered the room. He asked if that was his brother's colleague and warned that Frank only had 5 minutes left before leaving. But before he could walk away, Oscar Crushen asked how much he wanted in exchange for letting Frank stay. Then he formally introduced himself as Oscar Crushen, the mage who had created the medicine. The other man introduced himself as Grank Sirius, the older brother of Idiot Frank, as he himself called him. Oscar Crushen said that he wanted to propose a deal. Grank Sirius replied that it was quite reckless, and commented that he had heard Oscar Crushen was a genius, but he was still just a child daring to negotiate with the Sirius family. Even so, Oscar Crushen continued and explained that the agreement would benefit both sides. He promised to turn Frank into one of the top top mages of the White Tower within 2 years, and claimed that, in the long run, it would bring enormous benefits to the Sirius company. Grank Sirius asked what the penalty would be if he failed. Then Oscar Crushen replied that he would give up the profits from the next 50 years of vaccine sales in favor of the Sirius company. Grank Sirius asked whether he really had the authority to promise something like that, and the boy replied that he even had the vice master of the tower as a witness. Even so, Grank Sirius could not understand why he was going so far for someone like Frank. He said Frank was not worth all that. Then he asked if it was simply friendship. Oscar Crushen replied that of course Frank was worth it. He explained that he planned to restore the White Tower to the top within 5 years, and that the medicine and vaccine were only the first steps. To achieve that, he needed Frank. Grank Sirius replied that the boy was young, but as a merchant, there was no reason to refuse such an advantageous deal coming from someone so naive. However, he wanted to add one condition. Oscar Crushen said the proposal was already good enough, but Grank Sirius explained that merchants valued trust more than money. Because of that, the boy needed to prove his worth. Then he revealed that he had a level 5 knight as his personal guard, and scheduled a fight for noon the next day. Oscar Crushen would have to defeat that knight to prove his abilities. Only after that would the deal be accepted. Oscar Crushen reminded him that he was only a level 2 mage, but Grank Sirius replied that, in that case, he would also forbid the use of Kier's sword. Oscar Sage immediately realized that Frank's older brother had already decided everything. The Sirius family's strategic marriage would happen no matter what. Before leaving, Grank Sirius warned that he would be waiting for him the next day, and that if he failed to appear, he would consider it a surrender. After he left, Oscar Sage thought that even he would have difficulty facing a level 5 knight. Frank asked what exactly Oscar Crushen was trying to do, and said there was still time to cancel that crazy agreement. He also commented that Grank Sirius had probably only created that condition because he wanted to see Oscar Crushen get beaten up. But Oscar Crushen seemed confident. He said he would be able to win, and asked whether a level 4 mage would not be capable of defeating a knight of that level. Frank was shocked, and asked if he intended to reach level 4 in just a single day. Oscar Crushen replied that not even he could accomplish something like that. However, he explained that it was possible to turn someone who was already at the limit of level 3 into a level 4 mage. Frank was completely stunned. Then Oscar Crushen revealed the most important detail. At no point had Grank Sirius said that Oscar himself needed to fight. He had only stated that the knight needed to be defeated. In other words, Frank would fight in his place. And on that very same day, Oscar Crushen would turn him into a level 4 mage. Later, inside the training room on the 40th floor, Frank admitted that he honestly did not know whether he could accomplish that in only one day. Oscar Crushen told him to simply trust him. He asked Frank to keep his body relaxed, close his eyes, and circulate mana through his entire body all at once. The mana flow was very good, but when Frank finished, Oscar Crushen pointed out several specific spots on his body. He showed flaws in the wrist, shoulder, and near the chest. He explained that those were areas where mana leaked during circulation. Because of those losses, the completion level of spells decreased significantly. Frank asked whether every genius could see that kind of thing, but Oscar Crushen replied that they could not. That was something only he was capable of doing. Then Frank asked whether he would be able to level up simply by correcting those flaws, but Oscar Crushen explained that it was not directly related to a mage's level. He said that 99.9% of mages simply ignored that detail. However, the remaining 0.1%, known as Archmages, took it extremely seriously. From that point onward, Oscar Crushen began pouring out an absurd amount of information. He explained mana flow, how the circuits possessed 6 entry points, and how mana needed to be distributed evenly between them in order to reduce losses and maximize output. He continued talking about countless complicated theories and techniques, while poor Frank's brain practically fried, trying to keep up with so much information at once. After all of that absurd explanation, Frank still asked, completely lost, whether that was really all he needed to do. Oscar Crushen replied that yes, that was all he needed to do. But first, he wanted Frank to show him the magic he had used in the herb field. Frank was surprised and asked if he had seen that. Then he explained that he could not demonstrate the technique again and apologized. He said it was not because of distrust, but because he was afraid. He had almost died using that magic in the past. Then Frank explained what had happened. When he came of age, he became desperate at the thought that his family would mock him if he failed to show results as a mage. While trying to find a way to prevent that, he ended up learning that spell from an old book. The technique consisted of turning the body into wind. He tried starting with just his arm, but the transformation went out of control and began spreading through his entire body. Half of his body had already turned into wind, and he was about to disappear completely. At that moment, if the Tower Master had not happened to appear, he would have died. Or worse, he would have ceased to exist. Frank explained that, at the time, he had absolutely no ability to control it on his own. Even so, Oscar Crushen said that he had used the magic very well on the hill. Frank replied that, in dangerous situations, the technique kind of activated automatically, and he admitted somewhat embarrassed that it was pretty pathetic. But Oscar Crushen immediately denied that. He said Frank should never think that way, because many mages faced similar problems. Then he explained that, in Frank's case, the difficulty was mana control. It was simply a matter of practice. Frank answered that mana control depended entirely on talent, but Oscar Crushen had already started drawing on the ground with a piece of white chalk while explaining that normally that would indeed be true. However, there was a way to force the evolution of that ability. As he spoke, he drew an enormous and extremely complex magic circle on the floor. Frank became alarmed and asked what exactly he intended to summon, even asking if he was planning to make a pact with demons. Oscar Crushen replied that even if he wanted to, demons would probably ignore his call. Then he explained that what he intended to summon was something else entirely, a wind spirit that would be implanted into Frank's body. Later, standing at the center of the magic circle, Frank began reciting the incantation. He called upon the wind spirit, the embodiment of purity that drives evil and darkness from the world, while declaring that he, Frank Sirius, a human seeking truth, requested its companionship. However, after finishing everything, absolutely nothing happened. Oscar Crushen made a remark saying that Frank's spiritual affinity was garbage. Frank replied that he had felt a small breeze, but Oscar Crushen said that was merely his own sigh of disappointment. Even so, he told the boy not to feel too shaken, because only a small number of humans possessed true spiritual affinity. Even so, Frank was already beginning to despair. Then Oscar Crushen explained that there was still another method. He said he had learned a special spirit summoning ceremony when he visited the kingdom of the elves in his previous life. The elves had told him to try it for fun, and it ended up working. According to him, there was no way it could fail. Then he casually mentioned that, apparently he had become the first human summoner in 118 years. Frank was shocked, but Oscar Crushen said that detail was completely irrelevant. Then Frank asked if he needed to recite the incantation again, but Oscar Crushen told him to move aside. This time, he would perform the summoning himself. After all, he was certain the Wind King still remembered him. When he stepped into the center of the magic circle, Oscar Crushen remembered the past. Back then, he had not been in a simple training room, but standing before the greatest tree in the world. It was there that he first called upon the wind spirit, and it answered his call. The very next moment, a violent gale swept through the training grounds. Frank was completely startled and asked if it had really worked on the first try. Then, amidst the raging storm, the Wind King himself appeared. He was an extremely muscular man, with a long beard, shoulder-length hair, and clothes resembling ancient Greek robes. The Wind King asked if it had been Oscar Crushen who summoned him, and commented that it had been 27 years since the last time. Oscar Crushen immediately replied that he wanted to make a contract, and asked whether he needed to offer something in return, but the spirit answered that there was no need for anything so formal. His approval alone would be enough. Then the Wind King asked if Oscar Crushen wanted to form a spiritual partnership with Celestine, a spirit of extremely high rank. However, Oscar Crushen replied that he did not need such power for himself. The one who needed that power was Frank. The following morning, in the duel hall, Grank Sirius and Hamel Glimwitz were talking while waiting for the fight to begin. Hamel Glimwitz commented that the inventor of the cure was extremely stubborn. Shortly afterward, the knight of the Sirius family introduced himself as Leslie Morgan. Then Grank Sirius explained the rules of the duel. Each participant would receive a necklace of a different color, and victory would go to the one who removed the opponent's necklace first. He also warned that if 5 minutes passed without a winner, both participants would be considered defeated. Oscar Crushen replied that those rules were excellent, and prepared himself for the start. Grank Sirius also mentioned that he could surrender at any moment, simply by raising his hand. Then he looked at the boy's strange clothes, with the large hood and wide sleeves, and asked if he really intended to fight dressed like that. Oscar Crushen then calmly replied that he would not be the one fighting. Right after that, Frank appeared in the hall to participate in the duel. Grank Sirius became irritated and demanded to know the meaning of this. Oscar Crushen then explained that the condition had only been to prove his ability, not to fight personally. Therefore, he had simply taught Frank everything he knew. Grank Sirius admitted that he had indeed made a mistake by failing to specify that Oscar Crushen himself had to fight. Even so, he warned that the knight would not hold back just because the opponent was his younger brother. Oscar Crushen replied that he had not expected things to be easy either. He simply believed that a level 4 mage would have better chances than himself, who was still only level 2. Grank Sirius became even more confused, because until the previous day, Frank had only been level 3, so he asked how that was possible. Oscar Crushen calmly answered that this was only the beginning of their journey. After all, he had promised to place Frank at the top within just 2 years. Shortly afterward, Grank Sirius ordered Leslie Morgan not to hold back during the duel. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen approached Frank and told him not to be afraid. He said that if Frank put into practice everything he had learned, he would win without problems. Those words made Frank far more motivated and confident. He replied that he would win and return soon. Before the fight began, Leslie Morgan gave a respectful bow to the young master and commented that it had been quite a long time since the last time. Frank agreed, but the relaxed atmosphere vanished instantly the moment the duel started. Frank immediately created a distance of around 20 meters. However, before he could even carry out their planned strategy, he already felt the absurd pressure from Leslie Morgan's sword. Even without using a key sword, the knight exerted monstrous pressure from that distance. For a moment, Frank almost faltered, but then he remembered Oscar Crushen's words. He had always encouraged the boy and had trained him precisely for that moment. That thought restored part of his confidence. Then Frank attacked first, firing wind blades while thinking that, for the first time in his life, someone had said they needed him, and precisely because of that, he would not allow those expectations to be destroyed. All of the wind blades were blocked by Leslie Morgan, who admitted that Frank had improved greatly. He even said that the combination of attacks had become much more refined. However, after observing the movements for only a few seconds, the knight had already completely memorized the pattern of the spells. Then he advanced at absurd speed, instantly closing the distance. Frank reacted by unleashing a powerful wind palm, forcing Leslie Morgan backward. Grank Sirius asked if Oscar Crushen had used some forbidden method to make his brother stronger in only half a day, but Oscar replied that there was no need to worry, because he had used a safe and stable method. Meanwhile, Leslie Morgan cut through the wind palm and realized that the boy truly had grown far more than expected. Even so, he knew that Frank was not suited for the style of a battle mage, because his body was weaker than other people's, and continuing to grow like that would only end up hurting him. In Leslie's opinion, the best option would be for Frank to remain in the Corps. That way he would neither injure himself nor make the family worry. Grank Sirius thought to himself that Frank would never again be consumed by his own magic, and when Leslie Morgan approached to take his necklace, he believed the fight was already over. But then he noticed that Oscar Crushen was smiling. The previous night, the spirit transplant had been a success. Oscar then asked how his wind god was doing now. After that training, everything should already be fine. Frank was lying on the ground and replied that it was funny hearing that after getting beaten up so badly. However, Oscar explained that he still had not reached the level necessary to fully release the power of his body. The trauma had not yet been overcome. To win that duel, he needed to use 100% of the wind god's power. Then Oscar asked if Frank truly believed that turning his body into wind was all that ability could do. In reality, that was only the most basic aspect of it. The true power was unification, the absurd ability to transform into wind anything that came into contact with his body, including clothes and objects. Oscar also explained that it was important to hide one's cards until the right moment in battle. Winning that way made everything even more exciting. Then, at the exact instant he received the blow to the chest that would have torn away his necklace, Frank transformed his own body into wind, passed straight through Leslie Morgan's body, and grabbed his red necklace. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Frank could not believe it. He had truly won. Grank Sirius was also shocked, and began wondering if that really was the power of the wind god, because even the healers had said that Frank would never be able to use that magic. Hamel Glimwitz then declared that it seemed the fight had come to an end, and asked if anyone disagreed with the result. Oscar Crushen simply said that Frank had done very well. After that, Frank greeted Leslie Morgan one last time, while Grank Sirius officially acknowledged the defeat. At the time of their farewell, Hamel Glimwitz commented that it was a shame Leslie had stayed at the White Tower for such a short time. Leslie replied that unfortunately he could not remain any longer. Before leaving, he asked them to take care of his brother, and commented that he had improved a little bit. Then he turned his back and left without looking behind. He clearly did not want to praise his brother directly, but Frank noticed it anyway. He simply pretended not to hear it. The following day, Frank asked if that truly was the entrance to the place where he was going. In front of him stood a cursed door, surrounded by an extremely dark aura, clearly resembling an underground prison. Oscar Crushen admitted that the place really had been used that way hundreds of years ago, so Frank was not entirely wrong. Even so, Frank asked what he had done wrong to end up in isolated training. Oscar replied that it was a direct order from Hamel Glimwitz, which meant they had high expectations for him, but Frank could not understand why he needed to be isolated like that, especially after having only one day of rest. Oscar told him to look on the bright side. He said Frank needed to adapt to the spirit and organize everything he had learned up to level 4. Frank answered that he understood, but before he could complain any further, Oscar shoved him toward the door and locked the poor guy inside. After closing the door, Oscar Crushen felt a little guilty, because it had not actually been Hamel Glimwitz's idea. In truth, it had been his own request. On the night after the duel, Hamel had asked whether he really thought 30 days of isolated training would be a good idea. Oscar explained that it would, because Frank truly needed it. Hamel agreed, and took the opportunity to share some good news. The Sirius Merchant Company had allowed the White Tower to freely use their entire distribution network without charging anything. Oscar Sage immediately realized that they had already calculated everything. It was exactly the kind of decision expected from a trading company. If the White Tower returned to its peak, and Frank became an elite mage, their profits would be enormous. Their intentions were obvious, which was why they were offering everything for free. Even so, he replied that it was truly excellent news. Right after that, Hamel Glimwitz asked for another favor. He asked whether Oscar would be willing to teach the tower's mages. Oscar replied that it was not a matter of unwillingness, but he believed they would rather have him focus more on potion-related matters. Then he commented that there there was probably some reason why the White Tower's mages needed to become stronger. Hamel answered that he really did notice things quickly, and asked if he had ever heard of the Night of Mages. The event was a day when all magic towers gathered in a single place. Originally, it had been created by the Emperor to showcase the evolution of magical abilities and promote unity among the towers. But, as expected, it had failed. Nowadays, the Night of Mages had practically become a place where mages gathered only to argue, compete, and insult one another. The towers always ended up fighting among themselves. The event should have been cancelled many years ago, but Oscar Crushen asked whether His Majesty intended to officially revive the Night of Mages. Hamel Glimwitz replied that yes, although the information had not yet been publicly announced. The imperial family would reveal the details once the new year arrived. Even so, Hamel commented that he was suspicious of the Black Tower. As long as they continued trying to become one of the 4 great main towers, there was a possibility that the White Tower would be attacked. Everything had been going well so far, and precisely because of that, he felt uneasy. At that very moment, Oscar Crushen agreed to participate. As he walked through the 36th floor of the tower campus, he thought that the Black Tower wanted to rise to the top with far too much arrogance. The White Tower would not lose its place even if he had to die for it. At the very least, he had managed to bring Frank up to level 4. The low-level spirit ceremony had been an absolute masterstroke, and he was extremely grateful for it. After all, he would never have imagined that a demigod would still remember a mere human who had not even managed to fulfill his promise. On that day during the summoning, the Wind King asked whether Oscar Crushen had called him just to place a spirit into another person. Irritated, he asked how he was supposed to stay calm in front of something like that. Even so, Oscar requested that he deliver a message to Salathrion of Silence, saying that the White Mage had returned. The Wind King became even more suspicious upon hearing that name. He asked how a boy like him dared to call Salathrion that way, and demanded to know who he really was. But Oscar replied that revealing it now would ruin all the fun. After that, he directly asked whether he would allow the transplant or not. The Wind King answered that Salathrion had permitted it. However, he made it clear that it would not be a spirit contract, only a simple transplant. Even so, that was already more than enough for Oscar Crushen. Before leaving, the Wind King delivered one more message from her. He told Oscar not to forget the old promise. At that moment, Oscar Sage thought that this time he would do everything properly. Thanks to her, countless White Tower families had been saved. Now it was his turn to repay that debt, and he would repay it with interest. Soon after, he picked up a notice. Written on it was an announcement about a special class intended for the White Tower's mages. The theme would be the reinterpretation of basic magic. The classes would take place every Monday and Thursday in room 4 on the 36th floor of the main building, exactly where he was standing at that moment. Oscar Crushen then decided that he needed to start taking care of his new family a little more. Later, the students began entering room 4 on the 36th floor. One of them found it strange that there was nobody above level 3 inside, and guessed that perhaps the class had some kind of level restriction. One female student commented that it was probably because the subject was basic magic, something intermediate mages normally ignored. Another girl remarked that, apparently the White Tower really did have more money now. She had heard that the Vice Master himself had invited the professor for that class. On top of that, they were using the main building, the same place where the Imperial Seminar had been held. Because of that, many believed the professor must be someone extremely important. However, a student sitting in the back started mocking the situation. He told them not to make him laugh just because they were using an abandoned classroom. That was Damien Proud, the only son of Count Proud. One of the female students thought he was being far too negative, but Damien replied that if this were truly a major investment from the tower, they would have created an advanced class with limited enrollment, just like the other towers did, not a simple class about reinterpreting basic magic. According to him, the room was filled only with weak, low-level mages. If the class were really as incredible as people claimed, at least some level 2 noble genius would be present. Suddenly, someone cast a sound prison over the entire room. Everyone fell into complete silence. Nobody could speak or hear one another. The only voice that remained audible was the man who had just entered. He calmly introduced himself, saying it was a pleasure to meet all of them. From that day onward, Oscar Crushen would be the professor of the basic magic reinterpretation class. At once, everyone began wondering whether that teacher really was only a level 2 mage. Oscar Crushen then commented that he imagined many of them had been disappointed upon discovering who the professor was. He observed the irritated expressions on the students' faces and realized he was right. So he said that anyone with complaints could simply leave because he had no intention of begging for anyone's presence. But there was one condition. Before giving up on the class, they would need to prove that they were truly good enough not to need it. Oscar explained that he would give them 10 minutes. Within that time, each of them would have to explain why they did not want to attend the class and why they had nothing left to learn there. It sounded simple, but soon everyone realized the problem. It was impossible to speak while trapped inside that sound magic. At that moment, several students began to understand that this itself was the test. Damien Proud quickly realized the purpose of the challenge. He thought that Oscar was basically saying that if they could not even break the spell and open their mouths, then they clearly still needed the class. And that was exactly what Oscar Crushen wanted. He had deliberately left small gaps in the magic, but it would not be easy to solve. Time passed, and nobody managed to escape the sound prison. When the 10 minutes were almost over, Damien Proud finally succeeded in speaking. At once, Oscar Crushen remembered his name and congratulated him. Damien arrogantly replied that it had been easy. According to him, it had only taken so long because he decided to play around a little before finishing. Then Oscar completely dispelled the sound barrier and announced that the time was up. The only student who had passed the test was Damien Proud. Damien asked whether that meant he no longer needed to attend the class. Oscar replied that yes, of course, he could leave if he wanted to. But deep down, Damien Proud became curious. If that had merely been the class introduction, then perhaps he really could learn something interesting there. Besides, leaving at that moment would also seem strange, so he decided to stay. Oscar Crushen immediately noticed what was going through his mind. He even found it amusing how easy it was to understand everything just by looking at the boy's expression. So he decided to give a reward for being the only one to pass the test. He said he would teach a spell right there on the classroom stage. Then he asked what Damien's favorite spell was. Damien Proud walked to the front of the room and answered that it was Wind Cutter. He then recited the spell and created around his own body a sort of armor made of wind and spinning blades. Oscar Crushen admitted that it was interesting and said that on that day, he would teach the real Wind Cutter. Damien Proud asked whether he was not seeing the spell right in front of him, but Oscar Crushen replied that no, that was not a true Wind Cutter. At best, it was a crippled version. Then he grabbed one of the spell's blades and explained that there were two mistakes in it. The first was that the spell was not even made of real wind. Next, he absorbed all the mana from the magic and asked what Damien Proud thought wind really was. He answered that it was the movement of air, and then Oscar Crushen explained that water remained water even when still, and fire remained fire no matter its form, but wind was only wind when the air was in constant motion, continuously flowing. That was why it was not exactly a wind cutter, but merely an air slash. He further explained that, just as stagnant water rots, magic made from air that does not flow eventually loses its form. As he spoke, Oscar Crushen spread his airflow throughout the entire room and told everyone to pay attention. He explained that the White Tower was a place that worked with wind, so magic needed to remain in constant flow, just like the minds of mages. Otherwise, everything would eventually be destroyed, just as he had demonstrated moments earlier. After that, he pointed out the second problem. Damien Proud was wasting far too much mana while casting the spell. Simply reducing that waste would already make an enormous difference. Damien Proud became confused and asked how he had noticed that just by looking. Then Oscar Crushen explained that when magic reached a certain level, it became possible to understand many things simply by watching someone cast spells, such as their habits, personality, and even the way they had learned magic. So Oscar Crushen decided to take a guess about Damien Proud's past. He said that he probably came from a proud family filled with important mages from the White Tower. He had grown up watching his family's magic and tried to follow in their footsteps. Wind Cutter was probably one of the spells he had tried to copy as a child, even before properly learning magic. Since it was a complicated basic spell, he had likely compensated for his lack of technique by pouring too much mana into it to achieve enough power, and in the end, he had carried that habit with him until now. Damien Proud was left completely speechless, because that was exactly what had happened. Then Oscar Crushen explained that now that they had discovered the problem, all they had to do was correct it, and his Wind Cutter would come out perfectly. After that, he even teased the boy, saying that since he was such an incredible student who clearly did not need that class, he could leave. Damien Proud immediately replied by asking who had said he would not take the class, and quickly returned to his seat. 3 weeks later, all kinds of rumors about Oscar Crushen had already spread throughout the White Tower. People called him the Star Professor and the Genius Professor. Many said he truly seemed impressive, while others still doubted him and wanted to find out whether he was really that extraordinary. Once the gossip spread, a huge crowd started showing up exactly during his classes. The room became completely packed, with so many people that it looked more like one of the tower leaders' seminars. Even the elder Maxim Bisk appeared to watch. Everyone was confused by the absurd crowd. Then Oscar Crushen entered the classroom, greeted the students good morning, and said that on that day he would teach an extremely important spell. The veteran mages became excited immediately, expecting something grand, but he simply announced that the topic of the lesson would be wind. At that moment, many people thought it was the most basic thing possible and felt disappointed for having raised their expectations so much. Maxim Bisk commented that he had only come to observe, but curiosity got the better of him, so he asked if Oscar had really gathered that entire crowd just to teach wind magic. Oscar Crushen answered yes and then asked the elder to give a demonstration. Even while seated, Maxim Bisk summoned wind. A powerful gust swept across the room and blew everyone's hair back. Oscar Crushen praised the demonstration, and then called on the shy Amy Raven, a little blonde girl, to demonstrate her wind as well. She became embarrassed and asked why he had chosen her specifically when there were so many better mages there. Even so, she cast her spell. Unlike Maxim Bisk's violent burst of wind, hers was only a soft and warm breeze, pleasant to feel. Then Oscar Crushen asked if everyone had noticed the difference between the two spells. The class began answering by talking about strength, temperature, and range, until a girl in the back commented that the difference was in the temperament of the mana. Oscar Crushen immediately confirmed it and called the girl by name, Veronica Fricks, saying that she was correct. Afterward, he explained that even though the casting process was practically identical, the two spells possessed completely different natures. Maxim Bisk's wind felt hot and aggressive like a desert wind, while Amy Raven's was gentle like a spring breeze. The difference was so great that they did not even seem like the same spell. Then he asked if anyone knew what mana temperament was. One mage answered by talking about the 4 mana systems: reinforcement, acceleration, balance, and special, but Oscar Crushen corrected him, saying that those were mana systems, not temperament. Even though they were different concepts, the confusion was understandable. Then he explained that, to truly understand this, they first needed to understand the origins of the White Tower and the concept of balance. Afterward, he asked why the White Tower and the Blue Tower were considered representatives of balance. One student answered that it was because of the characteristics of their elements, and Oscar Crushen immediately confirmed it. He explained that the Red Tower and the Golden Tower represented strong and fast elements, but not harmonious ones. There was no such thing as cold fire or freezing lightning in that world. Water and wind, however, could assume many different characteristics. They could become cold, hot, warm, and change according to the situation. That was why they represented balance. Even so, there was still an enormous difference between the Blue Tower and the White Tower. To illustrate this, Oscar Crushen spoke about water. Making water boil required temperature, pressure, and time. Hot wind, on the other hand, was far easier to create. Wind adapted quickly to its surroundings and changed its nature like a chameleon, and that was precisely why wind was so powerful, because it was mutable. Oscar Crushen released his wind throughout the entire room, causing a warm breeze to reach the back while a cold current swept through the front. Then he explained that this happened because wind was the freest element of all. It could carry an intense force like the flames of the Red Tower, move as quickly as the lightning of the Golden Tower, and still possess a fluidity similar to the water of the Blue Tower. But unlike water, wind had no natural limitations. The Blue Tower's water, for example, could not mix with oil, but wind could adapt to anything. Depending solely on the mage's imagination, wind could assume any kind of temperament. That was why it was the only element capable of harmonizing with everything in that world. Then Oscar Crushen explained that, as mages of the White Tower, everyone needed to pay attention to the way they perceived their own wind. The most important thing was not merely casting magic, but understanding how they imagined the wind and what kind of wind they wanted to create. That was the true point of the lesson. However, while the class continued, the elder Maxim Bisk suddenly began acting strangely. He seemed dazed, and his body reacted in an unusual way. Immediately, Oscar Crushen warned everyone not to touch him, because something was happening. The crowd became worried, but then he explained that it was merely an awakening, a process of magical enlightenment. The old man's synapses had reacted too strongly. After a few moments, Maxim Bisk returned to normal, and Oscar Crushen asked whether he was alright. The elder answered that he still had not reached level 8, but even so, he embraced Oscar Crushen and sincerely thanked him for the help. He said that the explanation during the lesson had helped him tremendously, and that he had even experienced a moment of enlightenment. While receiving several heavy pats on the back from the elder, Oscar Crushen thought that, thanks to that moment, his future classes would probably become much calmer. But the greatest gain of that day had not even been Maxim Bisk's recognition. The most important thing was that he had managed to catch the attention of Veronica Fricks, one of the most problematic students mentioned in young Oscar Crushen's diary. The next day, while walking through the tower's corridors, he remembered that Veronica Fricks had said she wanted to show him something interesting in the training room, and the worst part was that she had invited only him. As he walked, Oscar Crushen thought that she had actually seemed friendly earlier. Maybe she had genuinely enjoyed the lesson, but the moment he admitted that he did not know where the room was, she immediately went back to looking at him as if he were a piece of trash. When he arrived, he realized that it was not an ordinary room. They said there were only 3 rooms of that type, among more than 300. Even the color of the door was different. He entered without expecting much, but the moment he stepped inside, a voice echoed through the speakers, saying that the next generation training support system called Argo was now active. Right away, Oscar Crushen realized that it was a magic engineering room. He immediately imagined that those bastards from the Golden Tower must have been making rivers of money from it. Argo asked whether he wanted to register his information in order to receive personalized training. Oscar Crushen refused, so the system asked if he wished to continue as an unregistered user. Then it explained that there were several training levels and that he could choose any of them. Oscar Crushen decided to begin with level 1. 3 balloons appeared before him, and the objective was to destroy them all as quickly as possible, using physical or magical attacks. He cleared the challenge in the blink of an eye and admitted that it was actually pretty interesting. Then he decided to jump straight to level 100. Immediately, Argo issued a warning, explaining that from level 80 onward, the spheres became smaller, faster, and hostile. The system even asked if he was elderly, a child, or pregnant, because if so, it would be safer to stop. Oscar Crushen calmly replied that he was none of those 3 and became curious about how far the training could go. go. Then 1,000 spheres appeared around him. The system explained that daily use magic was prohibited in that training, and that if he were hit more than 10 times, the challenge would end in failure. Oscar Crushen began launching several wind blades simultaneously, making them ricochet between the spheres while also creating showers of wind needles to strike them one by one. As he fought, he realized that the ideal approach for that kind of training was to create small and extremely sharp spells. Even while continuously dodging the spheres, he thought that the level had long since surpassed what should be considered acceptable for children. In the end, he managed to clear level 100. He collapsed onto the ground, completely drenched in sweat, yet still commented that it had been a good warm-up. While catching his breath, he thought that this was how the mages of that generation had been training since childhood. Compared to the past, the standard of current mages was absurdly higher, and that was excellent. It only meant that he would need to work even harder. In fact, he decided that he needed to start eating better in order to build muscle in that weak body. As he was leaving the room, he ran into Veronica Fricks. Oscar Crushen commented that she was training early. She replied that she had assumed he would ignore her invitation. Then he explained that he had only come to take a look around and casually added that he believed healthy mana came from a healthy body. After saying that naturally, he walked past her. Veronica Fricks stared at him with a strange expression and wondered if that boy had eaten something spoiled. After all, he had just casually repeated a famous phrase from the legendary Oscar Sage, as though it were completely normal. While watching him walk away, she remembered that the brat had always been arrogant toward her, even though both of them were orphans. After that, she asked Argo to start level 50 simply as a warm-up, but before beginning, she asked whether the rankings had changed. The system replied that they had. She expected to see Killian still in first place, but he had now fallen to second. The new leader of the rankings had cleared level 100 in 9 minutes and 57 seconds. However, the registered name was simply AAAA. For security reasons, Argo could not reveal that person's identity. Veronica Fricks was completely shocked. A time like that was absurd. She even thought it might have been some elder, but the rankings only accepted people below level 5. That was when she realized it was something unprecedented across the entire continent. Argo itself confirmed that it was the first time a result of that level had ever appeared. Suspicious. Veronica Fricks directly asked if it had been Oscar Crushen. The system merely repeated that, for personal data security reasons, it could not provide that information. Annoyed, she ordered the system to get out of her way. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen walked through the corridors while feeling sore all over because of that weak physique. Along the way, he encountered the elder Maxim Bisk, who said it was fortunate that he had found him. The old man explained that he needed to discuss an important problem. Feidenlein had informed them that the market merchants were refusing to buy their potions. They were probably afraid of the Blue Tower's monopoly. Since Oscar Crushen was the foundation of their current production, the elder believed he needed to know about the situation, and now they would have to find a way to solve it. Later, Oscar Crushen was visibly irritated. The people around him immediately realized that he was furious with the Blue Tower. While observing the movement around him, he also found the size of the coffee line strange that day. That was when he noticed 2 delivery workers waiting in line as well. They were the so-called wind couriers, who had apparently become one of the White Tower's greatest priorities during that period. And that disappointed Oscar Sage. The Great White Tower had ended up reduced to a delivery service. One of the mail carriers commented excitedly that their salaries were going to increase. The other replied that it was great news because now he could focus more on potions and spend less time on delivery work. But the first explained that it was not exactly like that. The tower mistress took the delivery system very seriously and considered it far too important to abandon. Oscar Crushen thought that delivery services normally were not even that profitable. They required a lot of manpower, generated little financial return, and practically no political power. The only real advantage was the positive image among the people. The White Tower was far more beloved by the citizens than any other tower, and that was a fact. While they talked, one of the delivery men mentioned that he liked helping elderly people carry heavy packages. He said they always gave him something to eat as thanks. Then Oscar Crushen decided to join the conversation and asked something simple. When they made deliveries, they met many people directly, right? The delivery men replied that they did. They needed recipients' signatures to confirm deliveries, so they always dealt personally with customers. At that very moment, Oscar Crushen's eyes lit up. He thanked them for the information, shook the mail carrier's hand, and ran off. Later, he appeared at a meeting with Hamel Glimwitz, who asked if he had understood the idea correctly. Oscar Crushen wanted to use the White Tower's delivery workers to make door-to-door sales? He answered yes. Hamel Glimwitz admitted that it was clever. Since merchants were not cooperating, they could simply sell directly to consumers. Even so, he asked whether that would really be viable, since potions were not everyday products. Then Oscar Crushen explained that they could change that by creating new products. He called it innovation in the potion market, although he did not even consider it something that revolutionary. The idea was to take the White Tower's best intermediate recovery potion and adapt it into 4 different versions based on age and gender. One version for children would help with growth, another for the elderly would increase immunity and energy. The female version would help skin firmness and reduce pores. The male version would help with muscle gain. As he made calculations and wrote non-stop, Oscar Crushen started pouring out so much information that Hamel Glimwitz became completely lost trying to keep up. A few days later, an old man waited for his usual delivery worker to arrive with the letters. When he received the mail, he happily commented that his old friend must still be alive then. The delivery worker joked that the man belonged to the generation of centenarians, so he would not die anytime soon. The elderly man then commented that, even though he was only 80 years old, his body and mind already felt extremely heavy. The delivery worker asked if he felt pain, and then introduced a new product from the White Tower. It was the S0 tonic, specially aimed at the elderly. He explained that the product strengthened immunity and increased energy. The S stood for senior. The old man asked what would change if he took it. The delivery worker replied that many things would change, and mentioned old my Larry from the 2nd Street, who had started hiking every morning after using the tonic. The elderly man was surprised, especially because the man had severe knee problems. Then the delivery worker explained that the product had been created by Oscar Krushen himself, the genius responsible for curing the Cadena flu. The old man asked how much it cost, imagining that something made by a genius would be expensive, but the delivery worker replied that each bottle cost only 30 bells. The elderly man immediately became suspicious, saying he had already fallen for tonic scams before, and nothing had worked. But the mail carrier sincerely replied that he would never deceive him like that. Then he presented a special offer for the residents of Siren, an annual subscription with a 50% discount. For 800 bells, he would receive 4 bottles per month, 1 per week, and could even pay in installments. The old man even started calculating that he might be able to afford it if he cut down on drinking and smoking. But the moment the delivery worker mentioned there was a free sample, he drank the tonic immediately. The next morning, the man woke up feeling renewed. He felt much more energetic during breakfast. He even rode his bicycle to the plaza, met his friends, and won a chess match because he was far more focused. The other elderly men became curious and asked what his secret was, so he proudly replied that he was taking a tonic created by the White Tower. But later, Oscar Krushen received troubling news. Lena White showed that the Blue Tower had launched a winter promotion. Moira Main himself publicly announced that they were doing it to help poor people stay healthy during the cold season. Oscar Krushen replied sarcastically that they were very kind-hearted. Lena White became indignant and asked what was so nice about it, since it was obvious that the Blue Tower was trying to destroy the White Tower. Even so, he calmly replied that they would not last even 2 or 3 weeks. She argued back, saying the promotion would last almost an entire month, and that, at that pace, they might not even be able to enter the potion market anymore afterward. Then she suggested selling the Cadena flu potions together to increase profits, but Oscar Krushen immediately refused. He said that was exactly what the Blue Tower wanted. If the White Tower tried to profit from a disaster like the Cadena flu, the population would become furious. The Blue Tower would then have the perfect justification to attack and reclaim the market. Lena White asked if they would simply accept being beaten. Oscar Krushen replied that there was still an enormous stockpile of potions sitting unused. She commented that they had so many stored that probably no one would even notice if 100 bottles disappeared. It was then that Oscar Krushen came up with another idea. He had just mentally created the Zero Tonic line. They would reuse all the unsold intermediate potions while also adding extra benefits. On top of that, if a family bought more than 2 items from the Zero line, they would receive additional discounts. That way, families with children or elderly people at home would buy them much more easily. Lena White was impressed and commented that his business mind was terrifying. Then Oscar Krushen explained the final step of the plan. They would pay the Information Guild to spread a rumor about the M0 tonic, a rumor claiming that the product also helped with male virility. According to him, simply spreading that story would make sales explode. 3 weeks later, at the Blue Tower, Moira Main was completely satisfied. He was certain that they had finally destroyed the White Tower. He even imagined that the head of the potion department would be proud of the results. But then the department head himself appeared holding a newspaper and asked if he had seen that day's news. When Moira Main replied that he had not, he got smacked on the head with the newspaper. Confused, he started reading the headline. The department head asked if he had really sacrificed all of the Blue Tower's profits just to achieve such a ridiculous result. On the front page, it was written that the White Tower had broken historical records with the Zero line, more than 10 million bottles sold in just 1 month. The newspaper also stated that the tonics had become popular gifts for parents, and that the male version had an unexpected side effect of improving virility, making it more effective than several other tonics on the market. Moira Main was completely lost. He could not understand how that had happened. After all, they were talking about tonics, not potions. Even worse, those products were not even being sold in traditional markets. Then he finally noticed the explanation written in the newspaper. The White Tower's sales system was entirely door-to-door, and based on subscriptions made directly through delivery workers. The department head asked if he had seen that they were now going to give permanent discounts on their potions, claiming they had been moved by what happened to them. Meanwhile, Moira Main kept reading the newspaper. There was a statement from Oscar Crushen saying that after seeing the Blue Tower's clearance sale, the White Tower had been so touched that they decided to maintain a permanent promotion on potions. Moira Main replied that it was not a discount at all, it was a scam, that had always been their real price. But the department head asked if he truly believed the public knew that. That bottle had never been sold anywhere before. Then he asked whether Moira Main really thought he had won just because of a graph. Now, no matter how much pressure they applied, it would be difficult for the market to ignore the White Tower. People would begin seeking out their potions and tonics. After that, he warned that Moira Main had a lot of work ahead of him because he would now have to cover the losses suffered by the Blue Tower. And honestly, even working for free for the rest of his life might not be enough. Meanwhile, on the eastern side of the continent, in the Yang dynasty, several martial artists were trying to defeat a huge rampaging orc. They were being overwhelmed by the creature when a white mage suddenly appeared. Using a restless wind, she slammed the monster back into the ground and shattered its body into pieces in the blink of an eye. After the battle, she commented that this had been happening frequently lately and asked whether the man in front of her was Zheng Sheng. He confirmed that he was Zheng Sheng from the Nine Dragons sect. Then the mage introduced herself as Shasha Meist, the current master of the White Tower, and asked whether he had brought what she requested last time. Zheng Sheng replied that he had and handed over the Empire Bulletin, the newspaper she had requested. When Shasha Meist took the newspaper, she actually became nervous before reading it. She had been away for 2 months and started imagining that the White Tower might have gone bankrupt during that time, or even been expelled from the 4 great magic towers. But when she started reading carefully, she noticed something strange. The White Tower was accumulating success story after success story. She flipped through several pages and asked if it was some kind of fictional story, but Zhongshang replied that it was not, saying he had bought the newspaper officially and legitimately. That left Shasha Meist surprised. She began thinking that the delivery service was truly working much better than she had imagined. In fact, it had never even crossed her mind that the business would become such a success. She had not even created the service with commercial success in mind. There had been another reason behind it. After thanking Zhongxiong, she said they would meet again in the future. Then she flew away, trying to understand what was happening at the White Tower. She needed to see it with her own eyes. Later, in the laboratory, Lena White commented that Oscar Crushen really seemed like a special mage. According to her, the situation was almost magical. She asked how he managed to shake the Blue Tower with just a single interview. Thanks to that, sales of the recovery potion had exploded, and several cities beyond Siren had started requesting distribution as well. Since the plan had succeeded, she even tried contacting the army to see if they would agree to do business with the White Tower. But for now, they were still undecided, since they had always maintained a strong partnership with the Blue Tower, and did not have much reason to switch yet. Even so, Oscar Crushen said that at least they would no longer need to worry about potions for quite a while. Then Lena White asked how she should organize the performance reports, and he replied that 1 report per month was already fine. She then asked if he was simply going to dump all the responsibility on her while he went out to have fun, but Oscar Crushen replied that he would not have much time for that. Now that he had recovered the White Tower's money, fame, and fully stocked warehouse once again, he needed to take care of the tower's internal stability. One of the priorities was recovering the magical reference books that had been lost. The problem was something else. No matter how much of a genius he was, it would be far too suspicious for someone like him to suddenly appear with advanced magical theories. Because of that, he wanted to publish those theories under someone else's name. It needed to be someone well-known, old, respected, and specialized in magical theory. And as if sent by heaven itself, a mage exactly like that appeared at the White Tower at that very moment. While serving tea, Maxim Bisk commented that it had been quite a long time since they had last met. Feidenlein then asked Schweinkok if his research had been going well, since it had been almost 3 months since their last conversation. But Schweinkok immediately replied that nothing was going well at all. From his exhausted expression and the black clothes that looked almost like mourning attire, it was easy to tell he was an elder of the White Tower and a famous theoretical mage. According to him, the magic simply was not working. Even so, he still needed to present the results at that year's White Night Festival no matter what. Yet he still had not found the correct theoretical value. Maxim Bisk tried to calm him down, saying that research was always like that, and those things took time. But Feidenlein reminded him that he had already been stuck on that research for around 6 years. Schweinkok immediately corrected her, saying that it had actually been 7 years. Then he commented that if he could at least find the correct value, perhaps everything would finally work out. Feidenlein replied that it really did sound complicated. Then Maxim Bisk asked why he did not hire an assistant, someone like Oscar Crushen, but Schweinkok refused instantly. According to him, that research was far too advanced for a mage at Oscar Crushen's level. In his eyes, the boy would never be able to understand it. Then Feidenlein commented that Oscar Crushen had already reached level 2. Schweinkok was surprised by the information, and she explained that the boy had been working very hard. Even so, he asked if everyone there had not hated Oscar Crushen until recently, since they were always saying he produced no results and only wasted the White Tower's resources. But Feidenlein replied that was all in the past. Then Maxim Bisk explained that Schweinkok had become so focused on his own research that he had not even noticed how much the White Tower had changed recently. Only then did Schweinkok realize that the atmosphere in the tower truly felt far more lively. He even asked if they had won the lottery. That was when they explained that all of it had happened thanks to Oscar Crushen, who had finally started showing his true potential. They told him everything, from the business ventures to the magical theories and the recent results. After hearing everything, Schweinkok asked if the boy was good at alchemy. Feidenlein replied that it was not just that. According to her, it almost seemed like he had a merchant spirit attached to him. Meanwhile, Maxim Bisk declared that, in the theoretical field, Oscar Crushen was a true genius, teaching as if he were an elder professor. But Schweinkok told the two of them to calm down. He said he would meet Oscar Crushen since they insisted so much, but also asked them not to create exaggerated expectations. Deep down, he was not looking down on the boy. The problem was structural. According to him, there is a massive difference between seeing something from the first floor and seeing it from the top of a building. No matter how much of a genius someone might be, a level 2 mage would still have limitations in their own perspective. On top of that, his current research involved restoring the innate magic of the greatest genius among mages, the legendary mage of mages, Oscar Sage. So Schweinkok decided to give Oscar Crushen a surprise test. He formally introduced himself as one of the elders of the White Tower, specialized in theoretical magic and the recovery of lost magic. Then he explained that he was working on an important research project, but would not be able to complete it in time. The moment he heard that, Oscar Crushen immediately began thinking, a theoretical mage, famous, respected, old, and prestigious. He was exactly the type of person Oscar had been searching for to publish his theories without raising suspicion. Then Schweinkok apologized for the unexpected test, saying that since he was asking for help, he needed to confirm his abilities first. But Oscar Crushen calmly replied that it made perfect sense. After all, there would be no logic in calling someone who did not understand the subject. That answer pleased Schweinkok greatly. He liked the boy's attitude and asked if 50 minutes would be enough time to solve the test. Oscar Crushen answered that it would, and said he would do his best. While solving the written exam, he quickly realized that the questions were far too easy. Any level 5 or 6 theoretical mage would solve them without difficulty. From the style of the questions, it seemed like Schweinkok was either reviewing basic mistakes, or had already reached the final stage of the research, and merely wanted to confirm a few details. Meanwhile, Schweinkok observed in silence, and gradually began to feel shocked. A level 2 mage solving those questions so quickly simply made no sense. That would only be possible if he thought like a high-ranking mage, and already possessed a deep understanding of theoretical concepts. Then he noticed something even more absurd. Oscar Crushen was already on the last page. But suddenly, he stopped. At that exact moment, Schweinkok thought he had finally reached a question too difficult for him, but that wasn't the case. Oscar Crushen calmly explained that the final spell was something he himself had created. Then he handed in the test as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Confused, Schweinkok asked whether he had simply written the answer to the final question without actually solving the problem. At that moment, he felt disappointed. He had wanted to see how Oscar Crushen would handle advanced research if they worked together, but it seemed the boy hadn't even tried. However, when he began grading the test, he noticed something absurd. All the answers were correct, one by one. Then he reached the final question and stared at it in silence. He then asked whether he truly believed that answer was correct. Oscar Crushen replied that yes, he believed it was correct. So Schweinkok asked which of the 4 mana values he had used in the formula. That was when Oscar Crushen gave an answer that changed everything. He said he had used all the values at the same time. Instead of working with a fixed mana value, he had used a fluid one. According to the structure of the formula, a fixed value would inevitably cause errors during magical circulation, so he made the mana value continuously adjust itself to the flow of the process. At that moment, Schweinkok became completely excited. Almost unable to believe it, he asked if he could test that theory immediately. And it worked. Before them, a massive dragon made of wind and magical light appeared. The spell had finally been completed. Overcome with excitement, Schweinkok said he would make Oscar Crushen a co-author of the paper. He didn't even need to remain just a research assistant. He then thanked him repeatedly, clearly emotional. But Oscar Crushen was still confused and asked if that was really the spell he had been researching for so many years. Schweinkok then explained that it was. The final question of the test was precisely the reconstruction of a spell created by the former master of the White Tower, Oscar Sage. The legendary spell called Ouroboros. Although its form resembled a dragon, it actually represented the serpent that devours its own tail, the symbol of infinity. Oscar Crushen then began to wonder why someone would spend so many years trying to recover that spell. Ouroboros was an absurd technique. It consumed mana only once and then created an almost infinite flow of wind, practically defying the law of mana conservation itself. In theory, it was an infinite source of magical energy, but there was a problem. For Oscar Sage himself, that spell was a failure. Humanity had already conquered the land and the seas, but it had never managed to reach the skies. That was the true goal of the Blue Sky Project. During the war against demons, they began developing magical aircraft to gain an advantage in combat, and Ouroboros was created specifically to serve as the power source for those aircraft. The problem was that, despite the theory being nearly perfect, the amount of energy produced still wasn't enough to actually make an aircraft fly. Because of that, the entire project was eventually abandoned. In Oscar Crushen's view, Ouroboros could still be used in smaller spells since it remained an impressive technique, but honestly, it didn't seem like something worth 7 full years of research. Then Schweinkock commented that he needed to tell Sasha Meist about this immediately. Now that they had finally obtained the cornerstone of the delivery service, she would surely be extremely happy. Confused, Oscar Crushen asked what that meant. That was when Schweinkock explained that the current master of the White Tower had created the delivery service. Precisely because of that, she had been paving the way for the Blue Sky project. At that moment, Oscar Crushen was left speechless. He began to think about Sasha Meist and how she missed the former Tower Master. Even so, he found it absurd that she had made Schweinkock spend 7 years trying to recover a spell without even clearly explaining the reason. But Schweinkock didn't seem to care at all about the suffering of those years. To him, it meant something far greater. In his words, they had finally taken the first step toward fulfilling the dream of the former Tower Master, and his own dream as well. The first step toward opening the path to the skies. After 7 full years, they had finally made progress. Then Oscar Crushen asked whether they truly intended to repeat that impossible challenge from the past, the Blue Sky project. And Schweinkock replied that they did. This time, Ouroboros would be the main engine, but Oscar Crushen immediately pointed out the problem. According to him, it was impossible to make an aircraft fly using only the energy from Ouroboros. Then Schweinkock smiled and explained that he completely agreed. Ouroboros alone would never be enough. But the situation now was very different from that of 23 years ago. Now they had magical engineering, true magical engineering. Schweinkock explained that when Oscar Sage initiated the Blue Sky project and created his innate magic, the Golden Tower involved in the project ended up making an important discovery in magical engineering, and that after the end of the war they began developing feats considered extremely advanced. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen thought that he should have been the one to discover magical engineering, since they would be much richer by now. Schweinkock's theory was that by combining Ouroboros energy with magical engineering, it would be possible to make the airship fly, and he also imagined using a battery as a means of amplifying that energy, a battery capable of recharging itself with the very wind generated by Ouroboros, so that this energy would be continuously multiplied, creating a core capable of generating practically infinite energy. Oscar Crushen asked whether the Golden Tower already knew about this research, and Schweinkock replied that they did not, because to them the idea of an airship still seemed absurd, since they were investing in another type of transport, described as an iron serpent that runs endlessly across the land, called a train. Oscar Sage reflected that he did not know the project well, but believed that the Golden Tower master he knew would not insist on a failed idea, so the train would probably also mark a new era for humanity. Even so, it would not have the same impact as an airship. He then asked whether that was why Schweinkock had started the project even at a loss, and he replied yes, since the idea was to dominate the aerial delivery market, because current transport depended on carts and ships, and with the arrival of trains that would change, but if airships appeared first, even trains would become obsolete, since no one had yet conquered the skies. Because of this, they wanted to begin this new era, and Schweinkock explained that he and the Tower Master decided to recover the Ouroboros spell and present it at the White Night Festival, and that they only managed to make progress thanks to Oscar Crushen, so he thanked him for that, while Oscar Sage realized that he had abandoned this dream thinking it was impossible, but his disciples had not forgotten it, so he needed to open this path as a master. Oscar Crushen stated that they could go further, and that they should present the airship prototype at the White Night Festival, since showing something real would be more impactful than just a concept, and Schweinkock agreed and said he would provide the necessary materials. He then handed several books to Oscar Crushen, who realized he had never seen formulas like those before, and Schweinkock explained that they were studies for building the battery using magical engineering, based on the Ouroboros technique. Oscar Crushen carefully analyzed the material and realized there were several complete formulas and stability tests, and said it was incredible and that they could start the research immediately. Schweinkock replied that he had been thinking the same, but that he first needed to say something important. He apologized, and Oscar Crushen found the reason strange, while Schweinkock explained that he had dragged him into something extremely dangerous, since when the project was revealed, the Golden Tower would try to stop it by any means necessary, including violence. Oscar Sage calmly replied that it was fine, while Schweinkock insisted on whether he was not taking it seriously. He explained that lawsuits and even assassination attempts behind the scenes would certainly come, but that it would not change anything, because running away out of fear would prevent any progress and would not allow them to change the world. He also revealed that his greatest fear was precisely becoming someone empty, unable to grow because of fear, while observing that the White Tower had lost power, since the Blue Tower dominated the potion market, and the Red Tower had taken military contracts, leaving the White Tower only dealing with the Golden Tower in order to continue research. Even so, Oscar Crushen believed that this research could give them a future and a means to face all of that, so he accepted taking any risk, which left Schweinkock somewhat emotional. Schweinkock commented that he had ended up with all the cool lines minds, but Oscar Crushen replied that he was already cool enough as a teacher, and the two continued working together. On the first day of research, they analyzed the Euler equation and its relationship with mana and Ouroboros, while Oscar Crushen explained that any change should prioritize the stability of the airship even if there was a loss of performance, and Schweinkok agreed, and they continued testing. On the fourth day, Schweinkok was already tired and discouraged, saying it was difficult to modify such a perfect technique without generating errors, but Oscar Sage believed they were making good progress for such a short time of research, and suggested they could make the system even safer. They then decided to change the entire structure to a parallel system and integrate it with magical engineering, and Oscar Crushen confirmed that it made sense, while they prepared to continue. Before that, he got up to get food and coffee, but the lights began to flicker again, and he commented that this had been happening frequently, so he decided it would be better to rest for a while before continuing. On the sixth day, Schweinkok said he had always thought about it, that if he had not met Oscar Crushen, he would not have been able to complete the research, while observing the Ouroboros shining in the sky of the room, but Oscar Crushen replied that he would have succeeded on his own anyway, and that he was speaking seriously. Schweinkok then admitted that he thought it was impossible to reach the point of announcing airships, but that now, seeing such well-developed and stable magic, he believed it was truly possible. In that more emotional moment between the two, the room lights went out again, and Oscar Crushen commented that the Mana Central really had no fixing, while Schweinkok replied that it only made the magic shine even brighter and that he liked it that way. Shortly after, Oscar Crushen was immediately called to the Tower Vice Master's office, and Schweinkok told him to go without worry, because now it was his turn to shine and he would finish the battery that interacts with Ouroboros on his own. He also assured him that everything would be fine and that he could trust him, while Oscar Crushen headed to the meeting. In the Vice Master's office, Hamel Glimwitz commented that the blackouts were happening very frequently, and Oscar Crushen replied that they were already occurring every other day, which was indeed strange. Hamel Glimwitz explained that the mana supply was being interrupted often, and before continuing the discussion about the plant, Oscar Crushen asked if there were slimes in the area, saying he could help without any problem. Hamel Glimwitz thanked him, explaining that there were many slimes near the plant and that they had long been unable to carry out cleanup due to lack of personnel, so help would be welcome, especially since it could solve the blackouts. It was then decided that Oscar Crushen would go there, and he asked when he would leave. Hamel Glimwitz replied that it would be the next day at 9 o'clock at the tower entrance, together with Veronica Freaks. Upon hearing the name, Oscar Crushen asked if it was the same Veronica Fricks, and found it strange that a level 4 mage was needed for that. But Hamel Glimwitz explained that it was standard procedure to go in pairs, and that it might be good for them to talk, since she had seemed worried lately. Oscar Crushen accepted the explanation, but realized it probably wasn't just about slimes, and that the Vice Master wanted him to speak with Veronica Fricks. The next morning, he arrived 5 minutes early, but Veronica Fricks was already in the carriage, and asked why he was late, telling him to get in immediately. During the trip, she warned him that this was not a classroom, and that she was in command of the mission, since she had more field experience, while Oscar Crushen replied that it was fine, without insisting on a teacher-like attitude outside the tower. The journey continued in uncomfortable silence, until Oscar Crushen commented that she looked tired, but she replied bluntly that it was better for him to stay quiet, since this was not a class, and she intended to sleep. Even so, he insisted on understanding if something was wrong, but she maintained her closed-off attitude, making it clear she did not want to talk. Meanwhile, Oscar Sage observed that Veronica Fricks was described in young Oscar Crushen's journal as a mage of impressive talent, and he now wanted to understand that talent better. Oscar Crushen then tried to start a lighter conversation, noticing she was clearly irritated and sleep-deprived, and suggested that talking might help. With that, Veronica Fricks ended up revealing that she had not been sleeping because she wanted to master a wind as strong as that of the elder Maxim Bisk, but she could not even reproduce that level, which frustrated her and made her train non-stop. Oscar Crushen replied that this was expected because that kind of wind did not suit her, but Veronica Fricks disagreed, saying he did not know her well enough to say that, and that she had always wanted that kind of power. He then asked what kind of wind she thought he had, and she replied that it would be an arrogant and irritating wind, which he denied, saying his wind was known to be warm and welcoming. Veronica Fricks said she had never heard that before, and Oscar Sage realized he was referring to a more old-fashioned concept, while Oscar Crushen reflected that maybe even he did not consider his own wind that welcoming. He then explained that mana temperament is not something that can be forced, but something that is found according to one's nature, and asked again if she truly wanted a strong wind, while she remained skeptical. Soon after, they arrived at the mana plant, which was overrun with slimes scattered like living dirt, explaining the energy instability in the tower. Veronica Fricks immediately sprang into action, using wind pressure to eliminate the slimes with great speed and efficiency, and Oscar Sage clearly understood why young Oscar Crushen had described her as someone with absurd talent, since her combination of speed and mana control was truly truly impressive. She could cast spells that would take at least 7 seconds for a level 5 mage to concentrate, but she did it extremely quickly, and he thought it would be great to train her as a spell sniper like Majiro, since his fast casting did not even allow high-level mages to approach, making him known as the White Tower's war tank of wisdom. Veronica Fricks asked if she was the only one working there, and at that moment Oscar Crushen was further behind doing nothing, while she explained that everyone was gathered at the entrance and they just needed to keep watch. However, when Oscar Crushen entered to analyze the interior of the plant, he found the situation strange, since the slimes were all moving toward the entrance, as if fleeing from something inside the plant itself. She replied that he was talking as if slimes had intelligence, but he explained that he knew they did not, only following instincts like animals, with the strongest being survival instinct. She then asked what he thought was on the other side of the corridor, whether it might be some frightening monster, and he said they could go take a look. He continued eliminating monsters along the way until they reached deeper into the mana plant, and inside the energy room they noticed something completely out of control. Oscar Crushen observed a gigantic structure releasing electricity, which turned out to be a cocoon of a white silkworm-like creature, a species of moth known as the celestial silkworm. He explained that, unlike normal silkworms that feed on mulberry leaves, these ones consumed mana, which was why they had come to the plant in the first place, since there was a massive concentration of magical energy there. Veronica Fricks asked if that was its cocoon, since it looked far too large for something that had not yet been born, and he explained that it had already been born, and that this was just the metamorphosis stage. She then asked if that meant the slimes were not the cause of the instability, and whether destroying the cocoon would solve the problem, but he said there was both good and bad news. The good news was that the white silkworm in metamorphosis was not that dangerous, and could be dealt with in seconds by a powerful elder, but the bad news was that once the metamorphosis ended, these creatures developed an extreme hunger, and would attack any living being nearby. Veronica Fricks tried to downplay the situation, saying it did not seem that bad, but he added that judging by the slimes fleeing, the metamorphosis was already nearing its end, and that the noise and vibration were coming from the moth breaking out of the cocoon from within. He then told them to prepare for battle, as the entire plant began to shake more and more violently. Veronica Fricks asked why it had to be so big, and whether it would actually fly, and he explained that normal silkworms do not fly, but this one did. The gigantic moth then broke free from the cocoon, revealing wings made of brilliant mana, and Veronica Fricks immediately wanted to retreat, but Oscar Crushen explained that if they ran, it would reach the nearest city and devour people, so they had to defeat it there. Even though she was afraid, she took the front line, while he observed and thought that she was trying to protect him from a creature of that level. He then sent a wind message requesting reinforcements, and trying to buy time. Veronica Fricks completed her magic circle, and attacked the moth with wind pressure, slamming it against the inner wall of the plant, then advanced using a jet-like burst to close the distance. Before she could continue, Oscar Crushen grabbed her by the hood and threw her backward, using his wind to protect her, since the ground was covered in residues from the white silkworm that acted like acid and instantly melted flesh. He said she had nearly died and that it was probably a trap left by the creature, which, despite being an insect, had high intelligence due to magic. Veronica Fricks asked how he had noticed that, since it was nearly invisible, and he explained that he had observed the mana particles in the air. She questioned how that was possible, but he said he would explain later, since he was still analyzing the situation. Then he raised a windshield and blocked a mana blast from the moth, but realized the situation was bad, since he had lost about 70% of his mana from a single block, and would not be able to withstand another attack with what remained. The only advantage was that the moth took about 5 minutes to prepare another shot, so he said they had to finish the fight within that time. Veronica Fricks said she could not move her legs due to an injury caused by a fragment of the attack that passed through the barrier, but insisted she could at least buy time. Oscar Crushen realized she was lying about being fine, since she was trembling with fear, and approached her, saying she did not need to be afraid and that he would not leave her behind. She tried to deny it, but he stepped forward and declared that White Tower mages do not abandon their companions. With only 28% mana remaining, he used a speed spell to close in on the moth, while Veronica Fricks, even thinking he was reckless, used her jet burst to assist him. At that moment, he drew a prototype he had just completed, a pressurized magical wind pistol, and fired at the creature, piercing its wings with condensed wind projectiles. The moth then let out a roar and turned furiously toward him. However, for some reason, the moth's beam had recharged faster than expected, and it used the attack on the plant's wall to create an opening and escape. Oscar Crushen immediately realized this was likely part of its plan from the beginning. He did not have enough mana to chase it directly, but noticed a final thread of silk connected to the creature's body. Without hesitation, he grabbed it to be pulled along, being carried into the sky as the moth flew at high speed, destabilizing everything and making him nauseous from the constant shaking. The creature became increasingly aggressive upon noticing he was still attached, suddenly rising and then diving at high speed in an attempt to crush him and finish the attack. Oscar Crushen simply commented that it was a very stressed little creature, and calmly wondered why humans had hands, explaining that it was to handle things better. Then he released the thread for a moment, reloaded his magical wind pistol, and grabbed the thread again, aiming precisely precisely at the creature's head and firing a direct shot that exploded part of it, while he was thrown back through the hole in the plant's ceiling. Falling toward the ground, he warned Veronica Fricks that he was out of mana and asked her to save his life at that moment. She reacted quickly, creating a cushion of air with her burst magic, softening the fall and letting him land gently as if on a pillow. He remained unconscious for a few seconds, and when he opened his eyes, he heard her telling him to wake up. But as soon as he fully regained consciousness, she punched him hard in the face, complaining that he should not scare her like that again. Shortly after, Maxim Bisk appeared asking if they were alright, while Veronica Fricks was already crying with concern, and Oscar Crushen simply commented that both of his arms had been dislocated. She asked if he had suffered a dislocation, and he replied that the real problem was her hitting him while he was in that state. Maxim Bisk wanted to understand what had happened, and the next day both of them were already in the infirmary, heavily injured. News began to spread quickly, and Veronica Fricks showed a newspaper reporting that White Tower mages had defeated the White Silkworm Beast, while Oscar Crushen commented that in another time he would have enjoyed that kind of attention, but now he no longer cared as much. Veronica Fricks said they could still receive donations because of the feat, but he replied that he preferred to focus on taking care of his own people. At that moment, Frank appeared in the infirmary asking if Oscar Crushen was alright, and explaining that he had come as soon as he heard the news, which led Oscar Crushen to dryly comment about him having a strong smell, while also noticing that his gaze was firmer, as if he had truly evolved into a level 4 mage. Frank asked what had happened and why Veronica Fricks was there, but she quickly replied angrily for him not to use that intimate tone since they were not that close, which left him confused. In a more relaxed moment, Veronica Fricks asked Oscar Crushen if he was AAA, and he asked what that meant, saying he had no idea, so she simply replied that it was fine and dropped the topic. Shortly after, Maxim Bisk arrived, saying the deputy master was calling everyone, since there were meetings for Frank and Veronica Fricks, who ended up practically fleeing from him on crutches as they left. Before leaving, Maxim Bisk asked Oscar Crushen how he was, and he replied that he was better, at which point he received the White Silkworm Beast core and was also informed that he could keep the creature's threads. He questioned its value, since a core of that level could be worth hundreds of thousands of bells, but was told that the decision came from the deputy master and had been approved by other superiors, and Veronica Fricks said it was obvious that he should keep it, so he accepted. He decided to consume the core immediately, understanding that since the creature had just gone through metamorphosis, its mana was still not fully stable, but even so the material would greatly help his recovery. He ingested the core, meditated, and concentrated his mana, while Maxim Bisk watched in awe at how he handled raw energy, since it should have been difficult for an ordinary person, reinforcing that geniuses were truly absurd. Later, Oscar Crushen woke up feeling better, and discovered that he had already reached level 3, with his body more recovered, and even stronger, so he decided to stay another night in the infirmary, not because of exhaustion, but to continue analyzing his magic wind pistol, and think about improvements such as reducing impact and recoil. Meanwhile, at the mana power plant, a guard received an investigator from Nebula Grime, the Royal Special Investigation Headquarters, who had been sent to analyze the case since it was unusual for a silkworm beast to be born so close to the city's core. The investigator began reading the mana traces at the site and confirmed the presence of a level 1 mage and a level 4 mage, as well as combat records. He followed the battlefield area and noticed a sequence of very clean and controlled marks, indicating a precise battle. He also identified the concentrated oval trace of the cocoon, and noticed that the high-speed mage had participated in the fight first, but eventually became nervous, injured her leg, and was partially immobilized. Next, he analyzed the other level 2 mage, whose mana trace was extremely subtle and difficult to track, with movements so clean they stood out, concluding that this was someone extremely talented and unusual. The investigator also realized that the mage had used a weapon during the fight, since he found a modified fire bullet casing at the site, and from that point on the mana traces simply vanished before reappearing directed toward the sky, indicating that someone had followed the creature into the air with extraordinary boldness and extremely refined mana control, something he automatically associated with the level 4 mage involved in the battle. He then asked the guard for the name of the level 4 mage, and the guard replied that it was Veronica Fricks, which led the investigator to conclude that she had likely hunted the silkworm beast almost alone, indicating a promising future. However, the guard corrected the interpretation, explaining that there was a misunderstanding, since the one who actually defeated the silkworm beast was a level 2 mage named Oscar Crushen. This left the investigator doubtful, because it was hard to believe that someone of such a low level would leave mana traces so small and controlled that they almost disappeared from the environment. He considered it impossible, but then remembered the name Oscar Crushen, recognizing him as the boy linked to the creation of the Cadena flu vaccine, and the guard confirmed this information, which made the investigator also associate the bullet holes found at the site with a familiar pattern, probably linked to the weapon known as Trinity, used by the gunman Jack, although he did not understand how a level 2 mage could control such a heavy weapon without being destroyed by recoil, since it would require an absurd level of mana control. He then asked the guard if it was not an inconvenience for more information about Oscar Crushen, while at another another moment, already in the White Tower Library, Oscar Crushen himself observed the state of the place and found it strange to see books in such poor condition, looking more like materials that should be in a second-hand shop than in a respected magic tower, especially since that library had once been one of the greatest magical archives in the world, with extremely rare works and centuries of accumulated knowledge. But now it seemed to have lost almost all of that and been reduced to a weak and incomplete collection. He then remembered that 20 years earlier, during the night of the purge against the High Priest, it had been decided to copy the entire library archive, a task he had left under the responsibility of Edna Sol Laplace, the dragon, and he wondered where she might be, since she had promised to uphold the oath even if he died, and, as far as he knew, there was no way she could simply disappear for 20 years without leaving a trace, which indicated that something very serious must have happened. With that, Oscar Crushen decided that he would have to find a way to locate her himself, since he needed to recover advanced magic and also seek a path to break the limits of mages and stabilize his own mana. He ended up meeting the librarian and asked if there were any updated materials about dragons, and she led him to a specific corridor. But upon arriving, he immediately noticed something was wrong, because all the books about dragons looked overly childish or far too simplified. The librarian explained that those were the only available materials there, including stories like The Brave Mage and The Cowardly Lizards, which depicted ancient events involving Oscar Sage and battles against the High Priest, while dragons were portrayed as creatures that fled in fear. When he asked if there were no more technical or in-depth books, she replied that there weren't any in that library, suggesting he should go to the capital to find that kind of content. Oscar Crushen then reflected that in the past, there had been a huge number of dragon-related books, to the point it was hard to even walk between them. The librarian commented that she had heard there was a dragon who fought alongside humans, which made him immediately ask if it was Edna Sol Laplace, and she confirmed it, saying she was a companion of Oscar Sage, but also mentioning rumors that the dragon had gone after her own kind after they fled first. Oscar Crushen internally disagreed with that version, believing it made no sense, since even if the sky were to split in half, something like that would not happen. He knew that the one most disappointed in that conflict was Edna Sol Laplace herself, upon seeing her species flee, which reinforced his idea that he would need another way to locate her. The next day, Feidenlein was excited because all external activity fees for the mages had been paid, which moved Maxim Bisk, since earlier they had even risked selling their own belongings to keep the organization running. In that context, Hamel Glimwitz commented that they needed better planning to avoid that situation again, also asking how the children were doing. Maxim Bisk replied that there were still job offers outside, but everyone remained as loyal as ever. Hamel Glimwitz said he wanted to repay that loyalty to the White Tower, but until they recovered the lost advanced magics, the situation would remain difficult, admitting he should have tried harder in the past to learn. Feidenlein reassured him, saying he should not blame himself so much, because there were limits to how much advanced magic a person could learn. Maxim Bisk explained that only the Tower Master had access to all advanced magics, but that knowledge had also been lost over time. Feidenlein added that when Chacha took the position, only 6 magics remained. Hamel Glimwitz recalled that 20 years ago there had been 64 advanced magics, all considered extremely powerful, and asked if Captain Chester still intended to return, receiving the answer that he would not return until he completed his mission. The conversation continued with Feidenlein lamenting the situation, but emphasizing that if he returned, more advanced magics could be recovered for teaching. However, she then mentioned a new concern. An assassin known as the Mage Hunter had recently appeared in the north, leading to a decision to restrict departures after 10 p.m. as a precaution. But Maxim Bisk informed them that Oscar Crushen had left, saying he was going to Baron, which was precisely in the north. Feidenlein insisted he needed to be brought back immediately, but Maxim Biskin reinforced that he was probably already in Saren, since he had left at dawn. Given that, Hamel Glimwitz ordered immediate contact with the Baron branch to send him back as soon as he was found, making it clear that no matter his talent, he was still just a child who had only recently reached level 3 and would not survive such an attack. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen arrived neatly dressed, stepping out of a taxi in the free city of Baron. He observed how much the place had changed and thought it looked quite fancy, since it used to be basically a desert, but now seemed organized, with land bought by casino companies and magical engineering structuring everything. He eventually wandered into some strange alleys and reached a dark, abandoned, silent, completely deserted one, where a mage was already waiting for him. Based on his level and appearance, long white hair tied in a bun and a tattoo on only one side of his face, Oscar Crushen immediately judged him to be at least level 4 and assumed the Blue Tower had sent someone to take revenge on him after leaving Siren. So he asked what would happen if he simply refused the summons, and the assassin replied that he would have to be taken by force. The answer triggered an immediate confrontation. Oscar Crushen reacted quickly, blocking the first kick with a windshield that absorbed the impact, but it shattered right after. He realized his shield, enhanced with impact absorption and reinforced durability, had broken from a single blow. Understanding he could not lose initiative, he tried to retreat, kicking a can toward the enemy, who dodged easily and even mocked him. However, the can exploded deeper in the alley, throwing the assassin into the wall and creating an opening for Oscar Crushen to land a martial arts strike and knock him down. The enemy got back up, saying he was stronger than expected, and activated a jet booster to attack at even higher speed, landing a kick to Oscar Crushen's chest and sending him into the wall. Even so, he resisted without losing consciousness, which surprised the opponent. As the fight continued, Oscar Crushen stated that speed did not matter, since he could still sense mana. He then activated an Oscar Sage-style technique, releasing the ultimate move called Sound of Waves. At that moment, the technique worked in an almost absurd way. The air pressure struck the enemy like a direct impact, sending him flying and dropping him into a trash bin. Oscar Crushen warned him not to move or his organs could be destroyed, explaining that it was a resonance technique that created a frequency capable of harmonizing with the opponent's body and causing internal damage when it reached the organs. Even while injured and pinned down, the assassin said it was hard to understand and that he did not know how he had become so strong, before revealing that they had actually fought before, usually at the White Tower gym. He then explained that he had been sent by Deputy Master Hamel Glimwitz to bring Oscar Crushen back safely, since there was a known assassin called the Mage Hunter operating in the north. The situation became even more confusing when Oscar Crushen realized that no one had properly explained what was going on. At first, he thought he was simply being taken by force under an order, and the man even introduced himself as Killian Rockwood, a proud forest warrior. That made Oscar connect the name to Rodden Rockwood, his father, and an old companion of the sage Oscar Sage, one of the level 8 mages of the White Tower known as the White Lion. Only then did he realize the scale of the problem, after having already defeated the son of someone so closely tied to that history. Later, he ended up helping Killian Rockwood out of the trash bin, while the atmosphere grew heavier with guilt, since the warrior claimed his organs had been injured, but still refused to complain, saying the real issue was being unable to complete his commission. Even so, Killian made it clear he did not want forgiveness, and insisted on continuing the mission despite his injuries, explaining that his contract had an absurd cancellation fee that would practically bankrupt him. He then pointed to a billboard showing a woman, and explained that his mission was to serve as her bodyguard, the so-called Voice of Heaven. Later, Oscar Crushen went to her location and knocked on the door, introducing himself as Killian Rockwood of the White Tower, already fully committed to the misunderstanding created by the situation. Fight-in line manager Evelyn answered the door and said it was a pleasure to meet him, though he seemed a bit different from the rumors. Oscar's disguise was so well done that even the tattoo had been replicated with precision, and he simply replied that it was probably because he was wearing a suit, maintaining a completely convincing appearance. Once inside, Oscar Crushen found Marin Maria, also known as the Voice of Heaven, and the two sat down for tea, although he did not take anything while she chose only water. Marin Maria thanked him for accepting the commission, despite the lack of full explanation, mentioning that she had heard his success rate was above 80%, and had expected someone more demanding, while he replied that he took all kinds of jobs, still trying to recall the information Killian Rockwood had given him. In this context, Marin Maria was described as a figure who had appeared like a comet 3 years earlier, with a voice said to bring peace, known as the Voice of Heaven or the Singing Saint. Although Oscar Crushen initially thought it was just an exaggerated title, he realized her voice was genuinely beautiful. When she asked if he was a responsible person, he answered hesitantly that he was, remembering that Radden Rockwood had once been extremely loyal and responsible. Marin Maria commented that responsible people were the nicest, which made Oscar Sage consider the remark somewhat random. Soon after, Evelyn clarified the mission more directly. His job was simple: protect Marin Maria from assassination attempts. The press was likely being paid to ignore reports, and no media outlet reacted when someone tried to expose the situation, making it impossible to rely on external help or even the city itself. This made Oscar Sage think about how a powerful family in such a large city still could not resolve the issue, while also questioning what motive there could be for canceling her show, since any attack risk would first affect the city. The explanation then expanded to the event itself. The show would take place at the Baron Dome, a massive stage where over 100,000 people gathered. Evelyn explained that performers who appeared there earned the right to sing for the Emperor at New Year, after passing extremely strict trials, making it the highest stage a singer in Baron could reach, and the defining moment of Marin Maria's career. When Oscar Crushen asked if anyone else had been hired for protection, she replied that only he had been accepted, since even mercenary agencies had refused the job. That answer shocked him, and he took a sip of the tea he had previously refused while assessing the situation, concluding that an operation of that scale would normally require level 4 assassins or higher. He still did not know how many enemies might appear, but realized he would be alone protecting a performance for 100,000 people, which he considered absurd. He then asked about the cancellation penalty, thinking it might be better to withdraw for Marin Maria's safety and his own sanity, which immediately angered her. Marin Maria snapped back, asking if he was suggesting she cancel the show after 3 years of effort, while Evelyn tried to calm calm her down. She insisted she was only there because she wanted 1,000,000 bells, which made Oscar Crushen realize the scale of the stakes. She then questioned whether he had not claimed to be responsible, becoming so frustrated that she stood up, nearly broke the table, and dropped her wig, revealing slightly damaged pointed ears with scales, showing she was a mermaid. At that point, it was explained that mermaids were creatures from ancient stories, usually described as beautiful beings with exceptional voices and fishtails from the waist down. However, Oscar Sage knew that in reality they could temporarily transform their tails into legs before needing to return to their original form to recover. Marin Maria asked if it was the first time he had seen a mermaid, while Oscar Crushen noticed it made sense that she had a bathtub in her room, and mentally remarked that mermaids often suffered from longing for the sea. Evelyn then explained that Marin Maria was a half-mermaid, allowing her to maintain a human form for longer and reduce the effects of ocean longing. Oscar Sage reflected that this was why many mermaids strategically married other species, though they often became ill when living away from the sea, and their mixed-blood children were frequently rejected by both human and ocean societies. This might explain why Marin Maria began singing so early, until she noticed his gaze and asked why he was staring, insisting that her parents had married for love and were still alive. Still, Oscar Sage internally concluded that it didn't change the risk, and that if she insisted on that path, there was a high chance something would go wrong, which could affect not only her but also the audience. Marin Maria, however, firmly replied that the audience would be protected by artifacts in the seats, and that even if she died, she did not intend to give up, as she was already prepared to go all the way to the end. Evelyn said that was unacceptable, but Marin Maria replied that it was her dream and the only goal of the past 3 years. She had always been discriminated against and had no support from anyone, yet she still kept smiling and enduring everything as if she were innocent. The man asked why she was so obsessed with that show, and Marin Maria explained that 4 years earlier her father had been diagnosed with the so-called sea longing, a rare disease, and the doctor had said he would only have 5 years to live, leaving now just 1 year. Since everyone knew there was no cure, there was only one hope, a legendary potion known as the elixir, which could heal him, and she needed to obtain it within a year. That was why she could not give up on the Baron Dome. Evelyn then explained that if she managed to perform in the show, she would have the right to sing before the Emperor, and as a reward, could receive a drop of the elixir. Oscar Crushen questioned whether she was sure it actually cured sea longing, and realized that everything had started being planned by her 4 years ago. Marin Maria replied that singing was the only thing she was good at, her only path. He thought that parents were very important to her, although he had never had parents, and didn't know what that was like, since he grew up in the alleys, but he imagined that if a father was like his master, he would do anything to save him, so he could understand that feeling better than he admitted. He then asked if he could enter the Baron Dome at that moment, and Evelyn replied yes. Everything was already ready on the production side. He said they should go quickly, because there was still something to rehearse, but first he wanted to verify whether the audience was truly safe, making it clear that if everything passed his criteria, he would have no regrets about going on stage even with the risk of death, and then he would accept the commission, since it was already time for rehearsal. Meanwhile, at Arasweet's house, she asked if the other girl still hadn't cancelled, saying she knew she was stubborn but didn't expect this much, while her assistant commented that she thought they really wouldn't kill her, and Arasweet replied that no, because she just wanted to sing even if it cost her life, something she considered cruel. The assistant then brought some gossip, saying that Marin Maria had left the hotel with a man who looked like a guard, not a boyfriend, and Arasweet replied that she had already blocked contact with mercenary agencies, so he must have come from elsewhere, ordering them to check his skills and send her best men. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen was on stage at the Dome organizing everything, and after finishing his inspection, he stated that the protection artifact in the seats was perfect and accepted the commission, suggesting they finalize the official contract at the hotel, which Evelyn said was already prepared. Marin Maria asked if that earlier rehearsal had been everything, and if they didn't need anything else, saying that now it was just time to enjoy their freedom. Oscar Crushen thought she looked like an angel on the outside, but like a demon on the inside, while she thanked him, and he replied that he was only doing it for the money, realizing then that 2 assassins were following them. Without concern, he fired 2 wind projectiles, one for each, hitting them directly and killing them instantly without any commotion. After that, Arasweet was informed of their deaths and asked how it had happened, receiving the answer that there were no signs of a fight, only bullet holes in the forehead, looking like the work of an experienced bodyguard, which made her decide to go personally meet that man, since she also wanted to hire him. Later, at the Grand Baran Hotel, in the private dining room, Marin Maria was presenting the dishes to Oscar Crushen very politely, while he noticed she completely changed personality when there was an audience. He warned them to be careful about what they said outside, reminding them that the room could be recorded, although he had already disabled everything. Marin Maria commented that they had almost had recordings leaked, and Evelyn said she seemed more comfortable there. She denied it but asked if he liked the food, called dumplings, and he replied that it was good to eat something like that after a long time, remembering he was already tired of that kind of food during wartime, but it had been a long time since he had tasted anything like it. Marin Maria asked if he had eaten it before, commenting that white mages from the tower were very poor, and at that moment the restaurant manager appeared, saying they should eat as much as they wanted, while Ara Sweet stated that she had paid for everything. Marin Maria asked if this wasn't a private room, and the manager explained that Ara Sweet had said she was close to them and just wanted to say hi. Oscar Crushen thought she must be on another level of wealth, but Marin Maria stood up saying she had lost her appetite. Ara Sweet then said that if she was going to leave, she should leave the bodyguard behind, and Marin Maria asked why, while she replied that she wanted him to give him up. She ordered Oscar Crushen to cancel the contract, offering to pay all fees and 10 times more, but he replied that his cancellation fee was 10 million, so it would be 100 million, leaving everyone shocked. Ara Sweet asked if he was joking, and he replied that he never joked on the job, introducing himself as Killian Rockwood. Ara Sweet realized he had said his name in the field and became irritated, but also interested, saying that this would make his life interesting. After that, she stormed out and ordered her assistant to call the Woodok brothers, but one of them already appeared, saying it wasn't necessary, revealing himself as Woojin, the older brother of the Woodok brothers, and an assassin of the Yang dynasty who had already been disguised as a waiter. Ara Sweet asked how he had managed that, and he replied that he could enter any place with the identity provided by his employer. She asked where Doko was, and he replied that he was at the headquarters, but she said the plan had changed. They no longer only intended to stop the singer's performance at the dome, they also wanted to kill someone. She ordered that the bodyguard, Killian Rockwood, be killed in the most painful way possible. Woojin commented that it was harsh for an ordinary young man, but accepted the mission, while Ara Sweet said they could do it their own way as long as it worked, and to ask for anything they needed. He thought that Marin Maria and Killian Rockwood would never dare to look down on her again, because they wouldn't have enough time for that. Meanwhile, Oscar Crushen was listening to everything she thought and said, realizing it was good that he had exchanged a few words with her, but he was surprised that Woojin hadn't noticed anything, since his wind spell had been very subtle, also remembering that it was said that birds hear at night, and mages hear during the day. He then told Marin Maria they would return to their rooms to rest, since the concert would be the next day. She asked why he hadn't accepted the 10 million offer, and Oscar Crushen replied that she really thought he had signed the contract just for the money, though technically he had, which still annoyed him a bit due to her arrogance. He then remembered that she wanted to save her father, and said he also wanted her to achieve that dream, since he himself had never had the chance to save his master, something that had become one of his greatest regrets. Because of that, he said that in order not to regret it later, they had to try everything possible. Marin Maria simply thanked him and obeyed, returning to her room. The next morning, the entire production team was already gathered around the dome, working intensely on preparing the concert, with cleaning and lighting staff moving everywhere. Meanwhile, Woojin infiltrated the area wearing a staff uniform, holding a photo of Oscar Crushen, believing the target was Killian Rockwood. He was impatient after waiting the entire day and thought that without the 5 million contract, it wasn't even worth the effort, also assuming that Doko would be disguised among the staff as well. When he came out of the bathroom, he ended up face to face with the target himself, Killian Rockwood, who was calmly washing his hands. Woojin hesitated for a moment, analyzing the information he had. He was a rising star of the White Tower, a martial arts specialist with physical reinforcement and acceleration, and at level 4 the same as him, which made an ambush possible but risky. Still, he decided to wait for the right moment, and act together with Doko, since failure meant death. But before Woojin even touched the doorknob, Oscar Crushen sensed something strange, noticing that his fingers had calluses, but his palm did not, which indicated the use of hidden weapons, and directly asked if he was an assassin. Woojin realized he had been discovered, and hesitated between attacking or joining Doko, but in that moment Oscar Crushen confirmed he was an assassin, and fired a wind bullet. Woojin reacted immediately, activating his hidden weapons and counterattacking, managing to pierce his opponent with poisoned needles, believing he had won since even a White Tower mage wouldn't survive that venom. Oscar Crushen collapsed, paralyzed on the bathroom floor, while Woojin concluded he was a rookie and prepared to finish him with a knife, but the moment he tried to stab his neck, the blade did not enter, blocked by a thin layer of wind. At that instant, Woojin realized his needles had also not reached the target, and before he could react, there was already a weapon pointed at him. Oscar Crushen calmly explained that he had wrapped his entire body in wind, blocking all attacks, and stated that he was not that slow. Then, without hesitation, he blew Woojin's head apart. Meanwhile, Marin Maria's show finally began, attracting countless fans enchanted by her voice. Elsewhere, Dako was waiting for his brother, sensing something was wrong when he heard footsteps, but he ended up encountering Oscar Crushen, who said he had been hiding well. Dako asked how he dared to appear there, already suspicious of what had happened to his brother, and Oscar Crushen replied directly that he had blown his head apart. Dako reacted coldly, saying that was expected since they were assassins, though he admitted it was supposedly their last job before retirement. environment. Curious, Oscar Crushen asked if they were really going to retire, and Dako replied no, saying they had been recruited by other elite organizations, which made the mage interested, stating that it would become a duel between assassin and mage. Dako then said the White Tower was not the best, and that would change within the year. Dako then released his poisonous key, spreading toxic energy through the environment and stating that hidden weapons were for those who didn't know how to properly use poison, launching an orb that melted part of the dome's ceiling and walls. Oscar Crushen narrowly dodged, while Dako warned that even a scratch would be enough to poison him. When questioned about his calmness, Oscar Crushen explained that he had wrapped his entire body in wind mana, blocking outside air, and could even generate clean oxygen within himself, stating that this was the level required to be the best. Dako, in turn, said killing his brother did not seem accidental, and the confrontation between them finally escalated. Oscar Crushen immediately noticed that Dako had created 4 condensed poison spheres, so he focused mana into his eyes and accelerated his body to break through everything at once and close the distance. He managed to get close and fired at the enemy's head, but the bullet simply melted before touching his skin, and Dako commented that it had been risky. Oscar Crushen immediately understood that he was truly skilled, able to dissolve the projectile with his own poisonous key. In response, Dako pulled his brother's killer closer and asked if that was how he had died, then delivered a violent kick to the mage's ribs, sending him crashing into the stairs, where he fell, breaking several ribs and an arm. Dako said it must have hurt, although no one in the audience had noticed anything. Even while injured, Oscar Crushen replied that it didn't matter, and still tried to aim his weapon, but Dako asked if he didn't feel pain, since his arm was already destroyed and the fight should have been over. The mage answered that it wasn't over yet, and when he attempted to fire, both the bullets and the weapon were melted by poison. Dako was already confident of victory, but at that moment, as the song ended, Marin Maria instructed everyone to make as much noise as possible. That was when Oscar Crushen understood the signal and activated his sound imprisonment technique, accumulating all the voices of the crowd and releasing them at once as a sonic wave that directly struck Dako. The impact made his eyes, ears, and nose bleed at the same time, leaving him dizzy and weakened, but he still did not fall immediately. Oscar Crushen acknowledged his resistance, since the shock of tens of thousands of voices should have been devastating, yet he still managed to remain on his knees. When Dako tried to launch his poison spear, he completely missed due to having lost his hearing and sense of direction, and began screaming from the intense pain. Oscar Crushen decided to end the fight right there, and without prolonging the suffering, fired a wind projectile into Dako's heart, finishing off the last assassin. He then thought that it was good that Marin Maria had perfectly understood the plan, since during rehearsal he had explained that upon hearing 2 gunshots, she should release fireworks and generate as much screaming as possible, which ended up being decisive. He felt relieved that it had worked. After all, it was the job of someone at the highest level. 3 days later, Marin Maria, no longer in her stage appearance, asked if he was sure he was well enough to move, saying he didn't need to pretend to be strong. Oscar Crushen replied that there was no reason for concern, since even a high-level priest had been called to treat him, while Marin Maria said she would feel guilty if he had died, since he had been on the brink of death when she found him. He thought it hadn't even been that serious, although it looked like it had. At that moment, Evelyn arrived to settle the payment, adding a bonus as thanks, totaling 1,100,000 bells. Marin Maria said that without him she would never have had the chance to receive the Emperor's elixir, but he replied that it had all been possible because of her determination, and that her father would surely be fine. When she asked if he would stay in the city since he was leaving that day, he answered yes, because he still had business to take care of. Marin Maria then warned him about Ara Sweet, saying she was likely furious and could act unpredictably, but he said he would be fine. Before leaving, she asked if he intended to keep hiding his real name, but he pretended not to understand until she revealed she had already noticed his lenses and had suspected it from the beginning. He then asked why she accepted him anyway, and she said she had been interested in his expression when he said he wanted to save his father, as if she were looking into a mirror, and that was why she bet on him without hesitation. Oscar Crushen commented that she didn't seem to care much about anything, and then finally revealed his true name. Marin Maria said she had already heard of him, and Evelyn confirmed that he was the White Tower genius who had created the antidote for Cadena flu. She commented that he seemed too ordinary to be a genius, and he replied that off-stage she also seemed ordinary, but on stage she became the greatest star. Marin Maria smiled and said he knew how to speak well, thanking him for being the best bodyguard she had ever had. Meanwhile, at the Baron Hotel, an assassin informed her superior that there were 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad. He started with the good, saying that Woojin's older brother had died, which she considered excellent since he was a burden. However, the bad news followed. The rookie himself had also died, side, which irritated her. The assassin explained that both had been killed by her brother, Killian Rockwood, who was working as a bodyguard for the other side, but when she was shown the photo, she found it strange, saying that it didn't look like her brother. It was then revealed that someone was impersonating him, and that person was Kaya Rockwood, a tattoo artist of the Purple Brigade, and Killian Rockwood's sister. Meanwhile, at the Sweet family mansion, Mark Sweet, the patriarch of the family, was discussing business matters and the movements of rival families, especially the Hoover family. His servant reported that the Hoovers were gathering mercenaries, but there was no one strong enough to worry them. Mark Sweet replied that they had already lost and should retreat with dignity, calling it useless persistence. The servant agreed and commented on the former mayor Buzz Hoover, saying that even though he had ruled for a short time, they still treated the city as if it were theirs, despite failing to protect even their own patriarch. Mark Sweet told the servant to be quiet and asked how the retrieval of Buzz Hoover's secret data was progressing. Buzz Hoover's son had been unable to break the password spell left by his father, even after months of attempts, making it clear that the protection was far more advanced than they had imagined. The servant observed this and commented that their own stupidity had actually helped reveal the existence of ultra-secret documents, completely changing the direction of the investigation. In that context, Mark Sweet confirmed that the heavens were on their side and asked whether preparations would be ready in 2 days, receiving confirmation that everything had already been arranged, including highly flashy fireworks prepared for the occasion. But the mood shifted when Mark Sweet remembered that that bastard had made his daughter cry and faint from rage. He then asked the servant if he knew anything about those involved, and was told that yes, there was the diva Marin Maria and Killian Rockwood from the White Tower. Mark Sweet ordered that Marin Maria be left alone since she was now connected to the Emperor and could not be touched. But regarding Killian Rockwood, he asked what he was doing at that moment. The servant replied that they would track and report all his movements, while Mark Sweet decided they would deal with it after resolving the Hoover family case, promising to make those responsible regret tormenting his daughter in that city, and at the same time make Kaya Rockwood pay as well, placing 2 direct targets in Oscar Crushen's sights. Later, Killian Rockwood was in a bakery eating a quiet meal and drinking tea, thankful that Oscar Crushen had completed his mission, since his previously destroyed body was now in much better condition. Even so, he said to keep the commission fee, because a forest warrior does not steal others' achievements, which Oscar Crushen thanked him for. Then Killian Rockwood asked where he was going, if he would return to the White Tower, and he confirmed that he would. Although he said in a slightly provocative tone that he would be dragged back by force if he didn't return, Killian Rockwood replied that he actually wouldn't do that because Oscar was more talented than him, and he wouldn't report anything if he didn't come back. He then explained that he was actually heading to the Blood Tower branch in Barren to meet someone, and also asked Killian Rockwood to take care of the body for a while, because the daughter of an important figure, someone named Ara Sweet, might come after him since he had used Killian Rockwood's name. Even so, Killian commented about a commission he was considering accepting, but decided to drop it because it wasn't worth risking his life for 500,000. This surprised Oscar Crushen, since Killian's reaction was very neutral. Then Oscar Crushen asked if he didn't want to return to the White Tower with him later, but Killian Rockwood replied that he needed to stay in Baran for a while because he was hunting the greatest traitor in the history of the Forest Tribe, someone who was supposedly active in that city. Because of that, he couldn't reveal details and only said it was his true mission. Oscar Crushen wished him good luck, saying they would meet again at the White Tower, and then made the forest greeting by striking his chest, which surprised Killian Rockwood, who asked how he knew that. At the same time, Oscar Crushen also realized how problematic his previous reputation must have been, since everyone reacted as if he were a different person. Still, Killian accepted the greeting and confirmed that they would see each other at the White Tower. While walking through the streets, Oscar Crushen reflected that going to the Blood Tower was risky, since Edna Sol Laplace might be hiding there, and the Blood Tower had resources capable of tracking even demons, although it was uncertain whether they could track something like a vanished dragon. Suddenly, he felt the presence of a level 7 energy and saw a woman observing him, wearing clothing that concealed her appearance. The moment a car passed by, she simply disappeared. Meanwhile, in another location, an assistant asked Kaya if she hadn't been too kind just because of a little friend of her brother, saying they should collect the debt. Kaya replied that nothing had been officially accepted yet, and that it might have been better not to capture that target at all, since a weak person killed by a level 3 mage wasn't worth the opportunity. However, she became curious and asked if the assistant would be able to locate her if she wanted to hide her presence, receiving the answer that it would be impossible. She then asked what the chances were of a level 3 mage in that city detecting her, and the assistant replied irritably that this wasn't a question and answer game, and that he didn't expect anyone capable of that in Baran. But Kaya said she had exchanged looks with him, and it wasn't imagination, asking for his name. The assistant replied that it was Oscar Crushen, a legendary genius of the White Tower, which left Kaya curious and excited about his future. Finally, Oscar Crushen arrived at the Blood Tower branch in Baran, looking for someone, and the receptionist asked if he brought the blood, receiving confirmation. She then took him to a room where he was supposed to place the blood in a prepared vial, but Oscar Crushen ended up pricking his own finger and using his own blood, which was an artificial dragon blood variant created from his own body. body. He mentally explained that by adjusting Edna Solaplace's data, he could alter the blood structure for tracking, even without the full effect of a dragon. He then placed the blood into the support vial, but before leaving the receptionist stopped him, saying he needed to choose a plan and pay in advance, which confused him since it had once been free in the past. Looking at the price table, he saw options such as continent-wide ultra-wide tracking, broad area tracking with variable speed, and city-limited tracking. He then chose the ultra-wide continental tracking, asking if it hadn't been free before, but the receptionist replied that it had never been free. When he tried to say he had heard that from someone at the White Tower, she interrupted him, asking if he was really from the White Tower. Oscar replied that he wasn't, that he had never had any connection with the White Tower, and he said it so directly that his shamelessness was obvious. The receptionist then commented that it was good, since there was a rule of charging 30% more for White Tower mages, because in the past an old master named Oscar Sage had used the special plan 108 times with the tower's benefit, nearly driving the Blood Tower into bankruptcy. The elders are still angry to this day just remembering him, saying he was far worse than his reputation suggested and had no sense of pricing at all. If the royal family hadn't paid the debts after the war, the tower would have practically ceased to exist. These stories always came with constant criticism, as if that old master had destroyed the organization's financial stability, something Oscar Crushen did not know. The receptionist further explained that there used to be a free service for tower masters, but that privilege was abolished because of him, making Oscar Crushen slowly realize that this had something to do with him personally. He then asked how much the special plan cost, receiving the answer of 1.5 million. When he asked if he could pay in installments, he heard a blunt "of course not." Even so, he prepared to sign the contract, while the staff warned that the process would take 1 to 3 days, and he left already quite irritated. Later, Oscar Crushen went to Killian Rockwood and explained that the commission he had mentioned before needed to be clarified in more detail because he was out of money, basically broke. Soon after, at the Hoover family mansion, both of them were already being guided to accept the mission. Oscar Crushen wanted to confirm whether the client was the son of the former mayor of Barron, saying he wanted to better understand the situation before meeting the client. Killian Rockwood then explained that the situation was urgent because they were recruiting as fast as possible, but the requirements were so strict that they were having trouble finding someone qualified, since deciphering encrypted information was not simple, and any mistake could destroy everything. He then began to provide context, saying he needed to talk about the former mayor of Baran, and asked if Oscar Crushen knew who he was. He replied yes, Buzz Hoover. Killian Rockwood then explained that Buzz Hoover wanted to change Baran. Although it looked like a rich and luxurious city, many people were suffering from gambling, drugs, and alcohol, while corrupt corporations ignored or even worsened the situation for their own profit. Because of that, Buzz Hoover declared war on trafficking, managing to reduce all criminal activity by 86% in just 2 years. However, after that, he suddenly died inside his own mansion before inaugurating a rehabilitation center, and no one knew the truth. Some said he was assassinated by traffickers. Others believed a high-ranking addict had hired the Purple Brigade. The current objective was to access the encrypted data he left behind before his death, which likely contained extremely confidential information. Oscar Crushen then realized there was a high chance this was directly connected to the people involved in his death, and asked what the connection was with the Sweet family. Killian Rockwood explained that Mark Sweet actually fully supported Buzz Hoover, being one of the first to fight trafficking, and because of that he gained public support and became a strong candidate for the next mayor. This made Oscar Crushen consider that he might not be a direct threat, until the doors of the room opened and a boy accompanied by knights entered. He was introduced as Jake Hoover, the eldest son of the Hoover family, who was impressed to learn that Killian Rockwood was the same bodyguard of Marin Maria, recognizing him as a White Tower star who had defeated the Woodok brothers. He then asked if they knew why they had been hired. Killian Rockwood looked at Oscar Crushen as if asking what to do, then explained to Jake Hoover that they had been called to decrypt data, which was confirmed. The young man then said his father believed that inside that data there was shocking information that no one had managed to decode so far. Oscar Crushen then asked if he believed his father's death was connected to it, receiving the answer that at first he wasn't sure, but now he was convinced. After his father's death, he hired several cryptography specialists, but all of them suffered strange accidents on the way to Barron: horse falls, vehicle explosions, bridge collapses, and bandit attacks, none of them ever arriving. This clearly indicated that someone was preventing the information from coming to light. Oscar Crushen agreed that it was extremely suspicious, and Jake Hoover explained that because of this there was a security procedure before hiring anyone. He presented a contract scroll from the Order of Eltura and asked if they knew how to use it. Oscar Crushen replied yes, recognizing it as an extremely rare and dangerous contract that could cost one's life if clauses were broken. Even so, Jake Hoover had managed to obtain it. He then explained the rules. The contractor could not damage the data, could not reveal the mission's contents, and these rules could only be overridden with his permission. The contract would also become void after the commission was completed. Oscar Crushen acknowledged that, despite his age, Jake Hoover was acting like a truly responsible heir of the family, but before signing, he wanted to confirm something, asking if everyone in the room had gone through the same procedure. Jake Hoover replied replied yes, saying security was his top priority and there was no reason for distrust. However, Oscar Crushen realized it was not just that. All of them were level 4. He then stated that he would perform the final verification himself, asking to see the already signed scrolls. One of the knights questioned how a level 3 like Oscar Crushen dared to act like that, but before the situation escalated, their bodies suddenly stopped moving, as if an invisible pressure had taken over the room. Oscar Crushen was using wind to create a crushing force, making everyone feel a weight in their chest. He calmly explained that it was just a precaution and not such a difficult request, which led Jake Hoover to authorize bringing all the contracts. Oscar Crushen analyzed the documents and called out the names Tom, Frank, Colt, and Barry. During this, Colt was hit by a wind bullet that threw him against the ceiling before he crashed heavily to the ground, leaving Jake Hoover confused and asking why he had done that. Oscar Crushen ignored the reaction and asked who had brought the scrolls, discovering it was a clerk, and then ordered his arrest as well, stating that all the contracts were fake and nothing more than ordinary paper without the divine power of the Order of Eltera. To prove it, he easily tore one of the scrolls, explaining that ordinary parchment tears like that, but a true divine pact does not. He added that the others were also not connected to the pact, meaning the information had likely already been leaked. At that moment, a bald knight drew his sword, but Killian Rockwood disarmed him with a kick and knocked him down with a strike to the face. The knight begged for mercy, saying he didn't know much and had only been hired without direct contact. However, Oscar Crushen replied that he knew exactly what he had delivered. The knight then said he had only reported the number of mercenaries hired and their levels, nothing more. Even so, Oscar Crushen concluded that the real culprit would soon appear to try to steal the information with even greater force, and told Jake Hoover that it was still too early to give up. He then charged a total of $1,500,000 for the decoding and another $500,000 for hiring both him and Killian Rockwood, including a full security review of everyone entering the house. Jake Hoover accepted the contract, while Oscar Crushen was certain he would not regret it. After that, Jake Hoover took them to a hidden stash where the materials were kept. Oscar Crushen commented that he liked hidden stashes because he had one himself. The location revealed a secret passage activated by a brick, leading to a briefcase containing the encrypted data, Buzz Hoover's personal safe. After a quick analysis, he noticed multiple protective spells, including triple encryption, resistance layers, and a self-destruction system that would destroy everything if forcibly opened. This made him praise Jake Hoover for not tampering with it. When asked if they could decode it, Oscar Crushen replied that yes, it was simple compared to the war cryptography he had seen before. In seconds, he broke through the protection and opened the briefcase, asking Jake Hoover to check the contents, which left him emotional. However, Oscar Crushen focused on finding real clues, while Jake Hoover commented that although there were records of corruption involving politicians and corporations, that was common in Barron and didn't explain a death. Oscar Crushen then suggested checking the diary, and Jake Hoover opened it directly to the June 10th entry, where Buzz Hoover described the city's progress against drugs and gambling, mentioning his partnership with Mark Sweet and believing Barron would become a better city by the end of his term, despite ongoing problems. Later, on August 22nd, he recorded that even after arresting many traffickers, none of them knew who truly controlled the system, suggesting a larger organization possibly linked to corporations or politicians. On August 24th, the diary showed growing suspicion toward Mark Sweet, as if he knew too much. By September 1st, Buzz Hoover called him a bastard and revealed he was the executive of the Empire's largest cartel, Happy Ending. On September 18th, he planned to inaugurate a rehabilitation center and destroy the cartel for good, the same day as his death. This led Jake Hoover to realize everything was connected and that Mark Sweet had been by his father's side the entire time. Oscar Crushen assured them they would solve it, stating they were not White Tower mages for nothing. But Killian Rockwood warned that the situation was more serious than it seemed, as Barron could fall under the control of a cartel. Oscar Crushen replied that it wasn't just a local problem, since the city received millions of tourists per year, meaning the impact would be much larger if the influence spread. Buzz Hoover's diary was the only proof against Mark Sweet's rise. Killian Rockwood then observed that the politician was already eyeing the next election and would likely act during a moment of public distraction. Jake Hoover confirmed that there would be a festival in the city center that night with fireworks, making the timing clear. Killian Rockwood suggested it would be better to evacuate Jake Hoover, since the confrontation was too big and they would need external support. But Jake Hoover refused, saying he would not run away and would not miss the chance to avenge his father's death, even if it meant canceling the contract. Killian Rockwood stated that they would not allow that to happen. Oscar Crushen asked if they had trusted him, right? And Jake Hoover thanked him for it. But Oscar Crushen said to save the thanks for later because what mattered was winning. That was the crucial part. He then asked if Jake Hoover had any communication device in the mansion. Jake confirmed he did, but it couldn't reach the outside world because security measures in Baran had been reinforced since the previous day. This made Oscar Crushen realize it was part of Mark Sweet's calculations. He then asked if there was a communication crystal, and Jake Hoover replied yes, since his father collected such items. One of them was in the same drawer, which he had found beautiful and asked to keep as a gift. Meanwhile, Killian Rockwood commented that the timing was absurd, almost like it was scripted. Oscar Crushen told him to shut up and decided they would use it. By channeling mana into it, he confirmed it was still working. This made Killian Rockwood curious, asking where he had learned that since it was a relic he had only seen in books. Oscar Crushen simply replied that he had learned it when he was bored, and it was nothing special. Meanwhile, at the management department of Colin Crystal, a jewelry shop that also handled communication crystal balls for collectors, the manager and the only assistant were sitting in silence, not doing much. Eventually the assistant asked what exactly they were supposed to do there, saying he didn't feel like he had been trained for it. The manager replied in confusion, asking if he was delusional. The assistant then commented that it was already his third day there, and they still hadn't done practically anything, even saying that even the government seemed to work more. The manager asked if he knew anything about the department, and the assistant replied yes, explaining that in the past it had hundreds of employees, and that it was an honor to work in such a historic place. The manager then explained that when activated, the crystal ball would emit lights with numbers, and their job was to record and interpret those numbers. The assistant found it tedious, but the manager proudly explained that before technological magic, this had been the main communication method across the entire world, where messages were sent through numerical codes that only those with the correct key could understand. There had even been portable versions and limits to number combinations, and it had been extremely important historically. The manager continued, saying that these numbers could form complex codes used even in wars, with messages being sent from battlefields to headquarters. That department was directly linked to the Imperial Palace, and only specific individuals knew the codes, such as tower masters and nobles trusted by the Empire. Suddenly, the crystal ball began emitting signals, with numbers appearing rapidly. The manager quickly deciphered them, and noticed references to Baran and the name Happy Ending, so he ordered everything to be recorded. He quickly assembled the full message sent by Oscar Crushen, reporting that the city of Baran was at risk of being taken over by the Empire's largest drug cartel, the Happy Ending, which had a plan to spread drugs across the entire country and that night would be decisive. The manager then ordered that the National Security Department be contacted immediately. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the Hoover Mansion, mercenaries advanced after already disabling cameras and passing blind spots. They were led by Omar, the overall leader of the Level 4 Mercenary Alliance, while Samuel, also a Level 4 leader, asked whether the cameras had been disabled and what they were waiting for. Omar said there was a plan to follow, but Jackson, another mercenary leader, claimed his men would act on their own. This caused the teams to split immediately, leaving Omar behind as he complained that gathering 152 mercenaries from 10 different companies without any organization was useless, since all the Level 4 leaders were full of ego and it only created chaos. Still, he had expected this from the beginning because there was a massive bounty on the head of the mage Killian Rockwood, which fueled everyone's greed. His team then said they couldn't fall behind, and Omar allowed them to move forward as well. However, at that moment, one of the mercenaries stepped on a trap and instantly lost his foot. When another tried to advance, he realized what had happened and warned that Jackson's group had already been eliminated. And that's it for this series today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.